She became the obsession of the CEO who lost control when another man got too close. A forbidden romance between employee and boss changed their lives forever. Get ready because this story will touch your heart. Subscribe to the channel, give it a thumbs up, and comment where you are watching from. The silence in the conference room of Allen and Associates was shattered by the shrill sound of crystal shattering against the polished mahogany table. Transparent shards flew in all directions, reflecting the cold light from the imported chandeliers hanging from the ceiling. 16 pairs of eyes immediately turned to the head of the table, where Richard Allen remained motionless, his hands still suspended in the air, the knuckles slightly reddened from the impact. "The meeting is over." His voice came out low, controlled, but laden with a tension that made the air in the room feel heavier. "Everyone out, now!" No one dared to question. Briefcases were hurriedly closed. Leather chairs scraped against the marble floor. The exodus was quick and silent, seasoned executives recognizing the signs of a storm about to erupt. In less than 2 minutes, the room was empty, almost empty. Laura Miller remained seated, in her chair, about 5 meters away from the head of the table, her eyes fixed on the open folder in front of her. Her heart hammered against her ribs with such force that she was sure he could hear it. Her hands, strategically positioned over the architectural drawing spread before her, trembled slightly. She pressed her fingers against the paper, trying to disguise it. "You too, Laura." His voice was softer now, but there was something dangerous in that tone, something that made her want to run and stay at the same time. She slowly lifted her eyes. Richard was now turned away from her, his hands resting on the ledge of the panoramic window that offered a privileged view of Fifth Avenue. Even from behind, he commanded respect. 6 feet tall, broad shoulders perfectly aligned under the navy blue Italian suit that probably cost more than her 3-month rent. His black hair, always impeccably slicked back, had a few rebellious strands falling over his forehead, a sign that he had run his hands through it. Richard only did that when he was losing control. "Mr. Allen," she began, her voice coming out firmer than she expected. "I need to understand what happened here. We were just discussing the project timeline for the commercial building, and suddenly... He turned abruptly, and Laura held her breath. His eyes, dark brown, almost black under that light, were fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin tingle. "You think it was sudden, Laura?" She stood up, instinctively adopting a defensive posture. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Laura was 5'6", an average height that had always made her work twice as hard to be taken seriously in male-dominated construction sites. Her brown hair fell in natural waves to her shoulders, today pulled back into a professional bun that was already starting to come undone after 10 hours of work. Her honey-colored eyes, her most striking feature according to her grandmother who raised her, now stared at him with a mix of confusion and something resembling defiance. Yes, it was sudden. She maintained a professional tone, even though her stomach was churning. "I was presenting the adjustments that Jake suggested for the facade of the commercial building when you simply—" "Jake!" Richard pronounced the name as if it were poison. He took 2 steps toward her, hands in his, dress pants pockets, jaw clenched. "The project manager. The one who thinks it's funny to crack jokes during serious meetings. The one who invites the whole team for long lunches every single day." Laura furrowed her brow, genuinely lost. "I don't understand where you're going with this. Jake is a competent professional trying to create a collaborative environment in the team. After that toxic management we had before he came from Miami, I thought everyone was appreciating the change." "You were laughing," Richard interrupted her, now just 3 feet away. His proximity always destabilized her in ways she refused to analyze. He smelled of something expensive, a mix of sandalwood, bergamot, and something indefinable that seemed uniquely his. At his joke, About, I don't even remember what. But you were laughing, Laura, as if it were the funniest thing you had ever heard in your life." His voice had dropped to an almost intimate register, and that did something strange to her stomach. Laura took a step back, lightly bumping into the chair behind her. "Mr. Allen." She took a deep breath, trying to maintain her composure. "With all due respect, laughing at a joke during a break in the meeting is not a reason for you to destroy a Waterford glass and kick everyone out of the room. There are partners in that meeting who have a stake in the company. You just humiliated people who... You don't understand." He cut her off again, but this time there was something different in his voice. Vulnerability, desperation. Laura couldn't decipher it. "You have no idea, Laura." The silence that followed was dense, heavy. Outside, New York continued its frantic dance. Horns echoed 20 floors below. Helicopters sliced through the grey January sky. The city that never stopped pulsed with life. But inside, in that conference room with its destroyed table and scattered crystal shards, time seemed to freeze. Laura crossed her arms over her chest, an unconscious barrier against what? She didn't even know. "So explain it to me. Help me understand why my boss, the CEO of the largest construction company in New York, is having a fit of jealousy? Is that it? Because of a laugh during a break in the meeting?" The word hung in the air. Richard closed his eyes briefly, his jaw working as if he were chewing the words before letting them out. "You, who should go," he finally said, turning back to the window. "It's late. Your daughter must be waiting." Laura felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. He always did this, demonstrated knowledge of personal details about her life that she had never shared directly with him. How did he know that every Thursday she left early to take Emily to swimming lessons? How did he know that her daughter was 7 years old and attended a public school in Brooklyn? How did he know that she drank strong coffee, black, but with a pinch of cinnamon that she brought from home in a small container because the office coffee was too weak? "How do you know about my daughter?" The question came out more accusatory than she intended. Richard didn't turn around. He simply observed the traffic below, the city he had helped shape with his luxury ventures. "I pay attention, Laura, to everything that concerns you." A shiver ran down her spine. It wasn't fear, or at least it wasn't just fear. It was something more complicated, more dangerous. This is inappropriate, Mr. Allen." "I know." The response came immediately, accompanied by a humorless laugh. "Believe me, I know better than anyone how inappropriate it is, but since you joined this company 3 weeks ago, Laura, nothing in my life has been appropriate." She should leave, grab her bag, her sketches, and get out of that room before the situation became even more complicated. But her feet felt glued to the marble floor. "I need this job," Laura said, hating how small and vulnerable her voice sounded. "I spent 6 years at the Brooklyn office earning a pittance, accepting projects that no one else wanted, working weekends to pay for Emily's school and the rent. When I received the offer from Allen & Associates, with a salary 3 times higher and the chance to finally work on projects that matter, I couldn't refuse. But if you're insinuating that there's something beyond professional here, then I need to know now, because I can't lose this job. I can't." Richard finally turned around, and the expression on his face made Laura's heart race. There was pain there, mixed with something that felt dangerously close to devotion. "You won't lose this job, Laura. Never. I wouldn't let that happen." He took another step toward her. "But I also can't pretend that you're just another employee anymore. Not after—" Her phone rang, the shrill sound cutting through the tension like a knife. Laura practically jumped to grab the bag hanging on the chair, her hands trembling as she searched for the device. The caller ID showed Emily's school. Her blood ran cold. The school never called unless it was urgent. "Hello?" she answered, turning her back to Richard, trying to control the panic in her voice. "Yes, this is her mother. What happened?" The conversation lasted less than a minute, but to Laura it felt like an eternity. When she hung up, her hands were shaking so much that she almost dropped the phone. "I need to go," she said, shoving sketches and documents into her folder without any organization. "Emily has a high fever. The coordinator said she's in the nurse's office and I need to pick her up immediately." She didn't wait for a response. She grabbed her bag and folder, maneuvering around the desk toward the door. But just before she could reach the doorknob, his voice stopped her. "Laura." Richard was no longer trying to hide anything. The concern in his voice was raw, unfiltered. "My driver can take you. The traffic is terrible at this hour. It will take you twice as long by rideshare." She looked back, and for a second, just a second, she let him see the fear in her eyes. The fear of a single mother who had no support network, who carried the weight of the world alone. "Okay," she whispered. And as they descended together in his private elevator, in a silence heavy with unspoken things, Laura realized she had crossed an invisible line. Nothing would ever be the same after that Thursday afternoon in January, when the CEO lost control and she saw, for the first time, the man behind the mask of power. The black luxury sedan cut through the traffic on Fifth Avenue with the silent authority that only luxury cars can impose. In the back seat, Laura gripped the handle of her bag so tightly that her fingers were turning white. Richard sat next to her, maintaining a respectful distance, but she could feel the heat radiating from his body, could sense every subtle movement as he adjusted his watch on his wrist or ran a hand through his hair. "Your driver is fast," Laura commented, more to break the oppressive silence than for any other reason. Through the window, she saw pedestrians and other cars pass in a blur as Jonas, Richard's driver of over 10 years, navigated the streets with the skill of someone who knew every shortcut in New York. "Jonas has gotten me out of worse situations than a Thursday afternoon traffic jam," Richard replied, and there was a trace of tired humor in his voice. He had loosened his tie now, the first 2 buttons of his white dress shirt undone. Laura forced herself not to look at the tanned skin that was showing, the beginning of a defined chest that suggested hours in some expensive gym in Manhattan. She stared firmly ahead. "I shouldn't have accepted the ride. It's complicated." "Your daughter is sick, Laura." His voice softened in a way that made something tighten in her chest. "This isn't complicated. It's a child who needs her mother. The rest... Can you wait?" But could she? Laura bit her lower lip, a nervous habit she had developed when Melissa was born, and she realized she was completely alone on this journey. The girl's father, David, her college boyfriend, had disappeared in the 2nd trimester of the pregnancy, claiming he wasn't ready to be a dad. The last time Laura had heard from him was 6 years ago, when he sent a message on Facebook saying he was living in Portugal and it was better for them to live separate lives. "Do you have kids?" The question slipped out before she could filter it, and Laura immediately regretted it. It was too personal, too intimate. Richard fell silent for a few seconds. When he replied, there was an old sadness in his voice. "No, I never found the right person. Or maybe I was never the right person for anyone." He paused, watching the city lights begin to flicker on as the January sun set behind the skyscrapers. "My father always said I was married to my work. He thought that was a compliment. I grew up thinking it was." Laura turned to look at him, truly look at him for the first time since they got in the car. His profile was strong. Straight nose, defined jawline, a small scar above his right eyebrow that she had never noticed before. Richard Allen was objectively handsome, the kind of classic masculine beauty that appeared in business magazines, but now, With the golden light of dusk illuminating his face, he looked human, vulnerable. "Is your father still alive?" she asked softly. "He died 5 years ago. Sudden heart attack in his office at 63. Richard continued to gaze out the window. He founded Allen and Associates in 1985 when construction in New York was booming. Worked 7 days a week for 40 years, 3 failed marriages, 2 children he barely knew, me and my sister. At the funeral, over 500 people showed up. Partners, clients, politicians, business people. He finally looked at Laura, and there was something fierce in those dark eyes. "Do you know how many were actually his friends?" "0. Not one." The car turned left, entering Teodoro Street, towards Pinheiros. They were less than 10 minutes from the school now. "I don't want that kind of life," Laura said, surprising herself with her honesty. "I mean, I work hard. I've always worked hard. But when I get home and Melissa runs to hug me, when she tells me about her day at school, when she wakes up in the middle of the night with a nightmare and I'm there, holding her until she falls back asleep," her voice faltered a bit, "that's worth more than any architectural project, any award, any professional recognition." "You're a good mother," Richard said, and it wasn't an opinion. It was a fact stated with absolute certainty. "You don't know me well enough to know that." "I do." He insisted. The intensity returned, that same intensity that both scared and attracted her in equal measure. "I know because you refused to work on Saturday when I offered 40% more for the overtime. I know because you have a picture of her on your desk, right next to the architectural drawings, to remind you why you're doing all this. I know because you always check your phone discreetly during meetings, not because you're bored, but because you're checking if the school sent any messages." Laura felt her face heat up. "That sounds like surveillance, Mr. Allen. It sounds like a man paying attention to the woman he can't get out of his head, even when he should." He replied with a brutal honesty that stole the breath from her lungs. Before Laura could respond, Jonas announced, "We've arrived, Mr. Allen." Lincoln Elementary School was a 3-story building, painted yellow and white, with an inner courtyard where Laura could see some swings and a small soccer field. It wasn't fancy like the private schools in the Upper East Side or Tribeca where Richard's colleagues' children studied, but it was clean, well-kept, and had dedicated teachers who genuinely cared about the kids. Laura had her hand on the doorknob when she felt Richard's fingers lightly touch her wrist. The touch was warm, firm, but not possessive. "Laura." He waited until she looked at him. "If you need anything, a doctor, a private hospital, medication, anything, call me." She should refuse. She should set clear boundaries between personal and professional life, between employee and boss. But when she looked into his eyes and saw genuine concern, not condescension, not obligation, but true concern, she found herself nodding. "Thank you for the ride." It was all she could manage to say before getting out of the car and running towards the school entrance. The coordinator, Beatrice, a woman in her 50s with grey hair tied in a bun and reading glasses hanging from a cord, was waiting for Laura at the reception. "Miss Laura, I'm glad you arrived quickly." Beatrice greeted her with a firm handshake. "Melissa is in the nurse's office with Nurse Sarah. Her fever spiked to 39 degrees an hour ago. We gave her antipyretics, but we thought it was best for you to come pick her up." "What happened? She was fine this morning when I dropped her off." Laura followed Beatrice down the hallway, the familiar smell of crayons and floor cleaner, bringing back memories of her own childhood in public schools. Apparently, it started during recess. She was playing normally and suddenly sat on the bench saying she was tired and had a headache. Beatrice opened the door to the nurse's office, a small room with 2 cots, a first aid cabinet, and educational posters on the walls. "But don't worry too much. There was a flu outbreak in her class last week. It's probably just that. Melissa was lying on the cot, so small under the light blue blanket, her dark brown hair. Laura's legacy was spread across the pillow. Her face, usually rosy and full of life, was pale and glistening with sweat when she saw her mother, her honey-colored eyes, exactly like Laura's, filled with tears. "Mom!" The voice came out weak and whiny. Laura's heart broke and mended simultaneously, as it always did when she saw her daughter vulnerable. She dropped her bag on the floor and knelt beside the bed, brushing the hair stuck to the girl's forehead. "Hi, my love. Mommy is here now. How are you feeling?" "My head hurts," Melissa whined, "and I'm really hot. Nurse Sarah said I have a fever." Sarah, the nurse, a young woman no older than 30, with a gentle smile, approached with a clipboard. "Her temperature is at 101.5 degrees Fahrenheit now after the fever reducer, but I recommend taking her to the pediatrician today, just to be safe." Laura nodded, already calculating mentally. The health clinic would be closing in an hour. The nearest children's emergency room would have at least a 3-hour wait on a Thursday night. She had the company's new health insurance, but she hadn't scheduled a pediatrician appointment for Melissa yet. "Let's go home, sweetheart," Laura said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "I'll give you another medicine and make that soup you like, okay?" Melissa weakly nodded. With Beatrice's help, Laura managed to sit the girl up and put her backpack on her back. Melissa was small for her age, only 4 feet tall and 48 pounds, resulting from a slim genetic background and the difficult months at the beginning of Laura's pregnancy when she could barely eat due to constant nausea. "Mrs. Allen," Beatrice called her as they were leaving, "just one more thing. There's a parents' meeting next week to discuss the school fair. It would be great if you could attend." The school fair. Laura had completely forgotten. "What day?" "Thursday at 7 in the evening. I know it's hard with work, but—" "I'll be there," Laura promised, even though she had no idea how she would manage to leave the office by 6 to make it on time. By the time they finally left the school, the sun had completely set. The sky was that deep purple hue characteristic of summer nights in New York, heavy with clouds promising rain. Laura began looking for the ride-sharing app on her phone when she noticed the black Mercedes still parked in front of the school. Jonas got out of the car immediately when he saw them. "Mrs. Allen, Mr. Allen asked me to wait to take you home," he said, opening the back door. "But he's not here." Laura looked around, confused. "He had to go back to the office for a video conference with investors from Dubai, but he left the car at your disposal." Jonas smiled gently at Melissa, who was clinging to her mother's waist. "And hello, little lady. I heard you're not feeling well." "Even sick?" Melissa was curious. "Your car is very pretty." "Thank you, little one. How about I take you and your mom home really quickly? I even have cold water and cookies in here." Laura should have refused again. This was crossing all imaginable professional boundaries, but Melissa was hot and fragile in her arms, and the thought of waiting 20 minutes for an Uber while her daughter suffered was unbearable. "Thank you, Jonas," she said, getting into the car with Melissa in her lap. The ride to Laura's small apartment in Brooklyn took 25 minutes. During the trip, Melissa fell asleep in her mother's lap, her breathing heavy from the fever. Laura absent-mindedly stroked her daughter's hair, watching the illuminated streets of New York pass by the window. Her phone vibrated. A message from a number. She recognized immediately. Richard had asked for her number on the first day of work, for urgent project matters. Until now, he had never used it. "How is she?" Laura hesitated, her thumb hovering over the keyboard. Responding felt like crossing yet another invisible line, but he had left her car. He had genuinely cared. "Sleeping, still with a fever. Thanks for the car." The reply came within seconds. "Jonas will be on standby. If you need to go to the hospital during the night, just call him, any time. That's not necessary, she quickly typed back. I know, but I'm offering. Anyway. Laura didn't respond. She simply put her phone away and looked back at her daughter's feverish face, trying to ignore the strange tightness in her chest. When they arrived at the building, a simple two-bedroom apartment complex in Brooklyn, without a doorman but well-maintained, Jonas insisted on helping her carry Melissa up to the third floor. There was no elevator, and Laura usually climbed the stairs without any problems, but with a 22-pound sick child in her arms and a heavy bag, she accepted the help. "Thank you, Jonas," she said when they finally reached the apartment door. "You didn't have to do all this." The driver, a black man in his 50s with graying hair at the temples and a fatherly smile, simply shook his head. "Mr. Allen has been paying my salary for 10 years, Mrs. Allen, and in all that time, I've never seen him so worried about someone. Take good care of your girl, and if you need anything, my number is on the card I left in the car." Before Laura could fully process what that meant, Jonas was already heading down the stairs. The next 4 hours were a blur of wet washcloths, too. Cool the fever reducers administered at the right times, and Melissa waking up crying every 40 minutes. Laura hardly left her daughter's room, sitting on the edge of the twin bed decorated with frozen sheets, passing a damp towel on the girl's warm face, softly humming the same lullabies her grandmother sang to her when she was a child. It was almost 11 o'clock at night when Melissa finally fell into a deeper sleep, her fever dropping to 100 degrees. Laura carefully covered her daughter and tiptoed out of the room, leaving the door slightly ajar. The apartment was small but cozy. The living room and kitchen were integrated, with 2 tiny bedrooms and a bathroom. The walls were white, decorated with drawings Melissa made at school and a few framed photographs. Laura and her daughter at the beach in the Hamptons. Laura graduating in architecture with a 6-month baby bump. Laura's grandmother holding newborn Melissa months before she passed away. Laura collapsed onto the 2-seater sofa, exhausted. Only then did she realize she hadn't eaten anything since lunch. There was no energy to cook. She picked up her phone to order something through the app and saw 3 unread messages. 2 were from co-workers asking what had happened in the meeting. Laura ignored them. The 3rd was from Richard, sent 20 minutes ago. "Still awake?" She shouldn't respond. It was almost midnight. She was in her pajamas, an old college t-shirt and sweatshorts, without a bra, her hair messy, and probably with deep, dark circles under her eyes. But her fingers typed before her brain could stop her. "Yes. Melissa just fell asleep. The fever has gone down a bit." "Have you eaten anything?" Laura looked at the screen, surprised by the question. "Not yet. I'm going to order something now." "Don't order." She frowned. "Why?" "Look out the window in 5 minutes." Laura got up from the sofa, confused, and went to the living room window that faced the street. Brooklyn was quiet at that hour, with only a few cars passing by occasionally. She was about to send another message when she saw a black Mercedes park in front of the building. Richard got out of the back seat. Laura's heart raced. He was wearing the same clothes as earlier, but the tie had completely disappeared, and his shirt was even more unbuttoned. He was carrying 2 white plastic bags that looked like takeout. The intercom buzzed. Laura pressed the button, her voice coming out higher than usual. "Mr. Allen? Can I come up?" His voice crackled through the old intercom. "I brought Chinese food and ice cream. I thought you 2 might need it." She should say no. She should thank him but explain that it was inappropriate, that it was almost midnight, that she was in her pajamas, that her daughter was sleeping in the next room. Instead, she pressed the button that unlocked the front door. 3 minutes later, she opened the apartment door to find Richard Allen, CEO of the largest construction company in New York, standing in the narrow hallway of the third floor with bags of Chinese food in his hands and an expression on his face that was part apology, part determination. "I know this is completely inappropriate," he said before she could speak. "I know I'm probably crossing every possible professional line. But I spent the last 4 hours in a video conference talking about profit margins and project timelines, and the only thing I could think about was whether your daughter was okay. If you had eaten, if you were alone dealing with all of this by yourself as you always do, because that's how you live your life. Alone, independent, refusing to ask anyone for help." Laura just stood there, holding the doorknob, completely unable to form words. "So I got in the car, stopped by the best Chinese restaurant in the area that was still open, and came here." Richard continued, his eyes never leaving her face. "And if you want to send me away, I will leave. But first, at least accept the food, please." The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything that wasn't being said. Then Laura stepped aside and opened the door fully. "You'll have to eat slowly," she said softly, "because the only table I have is the coffee table in the living room, and it's covered in architectural drawings I was reviewing yesterday." The smile that spread across Richard's face did something dangerous to her heart. "I think I can manage." And when Laura closed the door behind him, knowing that this would change everything, she realized that maybe, just maybe, she was tired of carrying the weight of the world alone. Sometimes accepting help wasn't weakness. Sometimes it was the bravest thing one could do. The coffee table was indeed covered in drawings. Architectural plans for the project in the financial district scattered in disorganized layers, calculators, rulers, colored pencils for marking, and a forgotten cup of cold coffee from the afternoon. Laura quickly gathered everything, stacking the papers with a care that contrasted with the urgency of her movements. "Sorry for the mess," she murmured, avoiding looking directly at Richard as he placed the bags on the now clear table. "I usually work here after Melissa goes to sleep. The bedroom is too small for a desk." "No need to apologize." Richard began taking the containers out of the bags, and the smell of Chinese food, lo mein, spring rolls, chicken stir-fry, filled the small apartment. "My first office was in the living room of my one-bedroom apartment in the East Village. I was 23 and thought I knew everything about civil engineering because I had just graduated." Laura finally looked at him, surprised. "You had your own office at 23? "I had to." Richard opened the last container, fragrant white rice. "My dad made it very clear that if I wanted to work in his company, I would have to start from the bottom, like any intern. So I decided I would open my own company." He let out a humorless laugh. "The foolish pride of a young adult. It took me 3 years to realize that I knew nothing, that I needed his experience, his network. When I finally swallowed my pride and asked to join Allen and Associates, he made me wait 6 months before accepting me. He said I needed to learn humility." Laura sat on the couch, picking up one of the disposable chopsticks he had brought. "And did you learn?" His eyes met hers, and there was something profound in that gaze. "I learned that humility isn't about bending to others' expectations. It's recognizing when you're wrong, when you need help, when—" He paused, serving yakisoba for both of them. "When someone else makes you want to be better than you are." The air grew thick between them. Laura lowered her gaze to the plate, pretending to be extremely focused on separating the noodles with the chopsticks. "You don't have to use chopsticks if you don't want to," Richard said softly, a hint of amusement in his voice. "I brought forks too." "I know how to use chopsticks," Laura replied, perhaps more defensively than necessary. "My grandmother worked in a Japanese restaurant in Little Tokyo when I was a kid. she taught me. And to prove it, she picked up a generous bite of noodles and brought it to her mouth perfectly. It was delicious, the kind of expensive food she rarely could afford. The sauce was rich, perfectly seasoned, and she realized how hungry she was. They ate in silence for a few minutes. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it was laden with awareness. Every movement of his registered in her peripheral vision, every sound of breathing amplified in the quiet of the apartment. In the distance, Laura could hear the characteristic sounds of New York at night. Sporadic honking, a dog barking, the neighbor's television tuned to some late-night show. "Thank you," Laura finally said, setting down the chopsticks. "For the food, for today, for everything." Richard stopped eating too, his eyes fixed on her with that intensity that always disarmed her. "You don't need to thank me for doing what any decent person would do, but you're not just any person, are you?" The words slipped out before she could censor them. "You're my boss, the CEO of the company. You have an entire empire to manage, meetings with investors from Dubai, decisions involving millions of dollars. And you're here, in my tiny office in Brooklyn, eating Chinese food almost at midnight because my daughter got sick." "Exactly," he said simply. "I'm here, because there's nowhere else I'd rather be right now." Laura felt her heart race dangerously. "Richard." She rarely used his first name, always maintaining the formality of Mr. Allen. But there, in that intimate space, the barriers felt ridiculous. "It can't happen. You know that." "What can't happen?" he asked, but there was knowledge in his eyes. He knew exactly what she was referring to. "This," Laura gestured between them, "whatever is happening here, you showing up at the school, sending your driver, bringing food at midnight. People must be talking in the office. That scene you made today in the meeting. Everyone saw, Richard. Everyone noticed." He placed the plate on the table, leaning slightly forward. "And what do you think they noticed, Laura?" "That you," she struggled to find the right words, "that you have some kind of interest in me. And when that leaks, because it always does, my credibility goes down the drain. Everything I achieve from here on out, every project I'm given, every promotion, people will say it's because I'm sleeping with the boss." The rawness of her words hung between them like toxic smoke. "You're not sleeping with me," Richard said, his voice dangerously low. "Not yet," Laura shot back. "But you know how it is, Richard. It doesn't matter what the truth is. What matters is perception. And the perception is that a newly hired architect is suddenly getting all the important projects, having constant private meetings with the CEO, being defended when she makes mistakes that would get anyone else fired." She took a deep breath, the next words painful to say. "I worked really hard to get where I am. 6 years in a crappy firm, accepting bathroom renovation projects while my college peers designed skyscrapers. Going out at dawn to inspect sites in dangerous neighborhoods because I was the only one willing to go. Studying at night after putting Melissa to bed because I knew I had to be 3 times better than any man in the room, just to be taken seriously." Tears threatened to surface, but she held them back with strength. "And now I finally have the opportunity I've always wanted, and I'm at risk of losing everything because my boss can't control his feelings," Richard finished for her. "Is that the word you're looking for, Laura? Feelings?" "Obsession," she corrected, and the word came out like an accusation. "You don't know me well enough to have feelings for me, Richard. I've been working at your company for 3 weeks. 3. You know my name, you know I have a daughter, you know how I take my coffee. But you don't know me." Richard was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with contained emotion. "I know you bite your lower lip when you're nervous. I know you twist a strand of hair when you're focused on a drawing. I know you arrive half an hour early every day because you don't trust the subway and prefer to have extra time rather than risk being late. I know you always eat lunch alone because everyone else goes out in groups and you don't want to seem like you're trying to fit in. I know you wear the same navy blazer every Monday and Wednesday because it's probably the only one you have that looks professional enough for important meetings. Each words were like arrows, hitting the target with painful precision. I know you never ask for help, even when you're clearly overwhelmed. I know you review your own projects 3-4 times before presenting, because you're afraid someone will find a flaw and use it to say you don't deserve to be there. I know that when someone compliments you, you deflect the credit to the team. But when something goes wrong, you take all the blame yourself. He paused, his eyes never leaving her face. And I know you're exhausted, Laura. Tired of carrying everything alone, of being strong all the time, of pretending you don't need anyone. The tears she had been holding back finally escaped, a single drop rolling down her cheek. She angrily wiped it away. Seeing these things isn't knowing someone, she said, but her voice came out less convincing than she intended. It's observing, it's watching. And that's scary, Richard. I know, he admitted, and there was guilt in his expression. I know my behavior has been unhealthy. It's not normal. When that project manager invited you to lunch in the second week, I almost fired him on the spot, for no reason. He did nothing wrong, but I wanted to ruin a competent man's career because he made you laugh. Richard ran his hands through his hair, a gesture of frustration that she was starting to recognize. I'm not like this, Laura. I never have been. I've always been the rational man, the one who weighs pros and cons, the one who keeps emotions completely out of professional decisions. And then you showed up at that new employee presentation meeting with your portfolio under your arm, and that look that said, I know I'm good at what I do, and you all will see it too. And something in me just broke. Laura didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to stand up, open the door, ask him to leave, and never come back. The sensible part, the part that had survived years as a single mother, the part that knew mixing work with feelings was a recipe for disaster. But there was another part, smaller, more vulnerable, a part she had buried deep after David left her, that wanted to believe, that wanted to allow someone to see her, really see her, with all her flaws and fears and the constant exhaustion she hid behind a professional smile. I can't lose this job, she finally said, her voice breaking. I can't, Richard. It's the difference between being able to provide a decent life for Emily and going back to that dead-end office where I earned $15 an hour. It's the difference between being able to afford decent health insurance and having to wait 6 hours at the ER every time she gets sick. It's the difference between, she swallowed hard, between having hope for a better future and just surviving day after day. Richard abruptly stood up from the couch, starting to pace the small room. 3 steps in one direction, turn, 3 steps back. It was like watching a caged lion, all that energy and power contained in a space too small. I'm not going to let you lose this job, he finally said, stopping and turning to her. Never. I don't care what happens between us, or doesn't happen. Your talent, your competence, your work ethic, that's real, Laura. It has nothing to do with me. You were hired because you impressed the entire board with your portfolio. You're getting important projects because your proposals are the best that come across my desk. And you're going to grow in that company purely based on merit. But people aren't going to see it that way, Laura insisted, especially after today. Do you think no one noticed? The way you look at me during meetings? How you make excuses to personally review my projects when you have a whole team of supervisors. How you got furious when you saw Jake making me laugh. Jake! Richard practically spat the name. That idiot didn't do anything wrong. Laura stood up too, frustration finally overflowing. He told a joke about a project of his in Miami that went wrong. A silly joke about a client who wanted a rooftop pool on a 20-story building. I laughed because it was funny, not because I'm interested in him, not because I want to sleep with him, not because I'm trying to provoke you." The silence that followed was absolute. Laura realized she had shouted, and her heart raced as she remembered that Emily was sleeping in the next room. She rushed to the slightly open door of her daughter's room, peeking inside. The girl was still fast asleep, her breathing more regular now, the fever clearly lower. When Laura returned to the living room, Richard was standing exactly where she had left him, but the expression on his face had changed. The anger, the jealousy, the possessive intensity, all had dissolved, leaving only shame. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "Laura, I'm sorry. For everything. For today. For showing up here unannounced. For putting you in this impossible imposition." He took the car keys from his pocket. "I'm going to leave. You're right about everything. This is not healthy. It's not fair to you." He started to walk toward the door, and Laura should have let him go. She should have let him leave, return to the office tomorrow and pretend none of this had happened, reinstating the professional barriers that had completely crumbled that night. Instead, she heard her own voice, low but firm. "Stay." Richard froze, his hand already on the doorknob. "At least until you finish eating," Laura continued, arms crossed over, her chest in a defensive posture. "You brought enough food to feed 5 people, and She took a deep breath. "I don't want to be alone. Not now. Not after this terrible day. Not with Emily sick. Not with my head full of worries about work and money and how I'm going to explain all this to her when she's old enough to understand." Richard turned slowly. "Laura," but with rules. She interrupted him. "We finish eating. You tell me more about how it was starting at your father's company, because apparently we have more in common than I. In thought, stupid pride and difficulty asking for help. Then you leave, go back to your fancy penthouse somewhere in Manhattan, and tomorrow we go back to being CEO and architect. No intense looks, no unnecessary private meetings, no showing up at my place at midnight with Chinese food." A sad smile appeared at the corner of his lips. "Those are good rules." "They are necessary rules," Laura corrected, returning to the sofa, "because I can't afford to risk my career on something that is probably just—" She searched for the right word. "Physical attraction, temporary fascination, whatever it is." Richard returned to the sofa as well, but kept a careful distance between them. He picked up the now cold plate of food and began to eat mechanically. "Do you really think that's all it is?" he asked after a moment. "Physical attraction?" Laura also picked up her plate, avoiding looking directly at him. "I don't know what it is. I just know it's dangerous and complicated and could destroy everything I've built." "And what if I told you—" Richard paused, choosing his words carefully. "What if I told you that I'm willing to do whatever it takes to protect your career, including stepping completely away if that's what you want?" Laura finally looked at him. "That's what I should want. It's what any sensible person would want." She bit her lower lip, that nervous habit he had noticed. "But I don't know if that's what I really want." The confession hung between them, heavy and significant. "So what do you want, Laura?" His voice was low, almost intimate. She took her time to respond, pushing the cold yakisoba around her plate with her fork. "I want not to have to choose. I want to be recognized for my work, without anyone questioning whether it was due to merit or who I know. I want to be a good mother to Emily, without feeling guilty for working late. I want—" She paused, the vulnerability finally cracking her armor. "I want not to be so tired all the time. I want not to have to be strong alone all the time, but wanting these things feels like weakness, and I can't afford to be weak." "Laura, Richard set his plate aside, turning his whole body toward her. Accepting help is not weakness. Admitting that you're overwhelmed is not failure. And having feelings, having emotional needs, doesn't make you less competent professionally. Easy for you to say, she shot back, but without venom. You're a man, a CEO, rich. You can have feelings and no one questions your leadership ability. I'm a woman, a single mother, still proving my worth. If I show any weakness, any emotion, I'm going to be seen as unstable, unreliable, a risk. The frustration on his face was palpable. That's true, Laura finished. That's true, Richard, and you know it is. You've seen how the other architects treat me. Fernanda, that senior architect who's been with the company for 15 years. She barely acknowledges me. Roberto, who oversees residential projects, always finds something to criticize in my work but never in others. They're waiting for me to fail, waiting for an excuse to say, I told you she wasn't as good as she seemed. Then we prove them wrong, Richard said with renewed intensity. Your project for the Olympic Village is going to be presented to the board next week. It's innovative, sustainable, economically viable, and aesthetically impressive. When they see it, when everyone sees it, no one will be able to question your incompetence. Laura wanted to believe. God, how she wanted to believe. But years of disappointment and struggle had taught her caution. What if they find out about today, about you coming here? They're not going to find out, Richard said firmly. Jonas is discreet. He's worked for me for a decade, and even if they did find out, I brought food to the home of an employee whose daughter was sick. That's basic compassion, not scandal. Basic compassion doesn't include showing up at midnight, Laura pointed out. Maybe not, he admitted, but I'm not known for my normalcy when it comes to... He gestured vaguely between the two of them. This, Laura repeated, a humorless laugh escaping. We don't even have a name for this, whatever this is. They fell silent for a moment, the weight of the conversation settling over them. The food was completely cold now, mostly untouched. Outside, New York continued its nightly symphony. Distant sirens, the sound of a delivery rider speeding down the street, the life of a city that never fully sleeps. I should go, Richard finally said, but he didn't move. You should. Laura agreed, but she also stayed exactly where she was. Their eyes met, and in that moment, all the words, all the rules, all the rational worries seemed to evaporate. There were just the two of them, a space too small, and an attraction that transcended logic. It was Laura who broke eye contact first, abruptly standing up from the sofa. Do you want coffee? I'm sure I won't be able to sleep now, and... She was nervously rambling. You're probably used to those fancy office coffees, but I have good grounds from the Brazilian store in the market with cinnamon like I like. Laura, Richard also stood up but kept his distance. Breathe. She stopped, realizing she was indeed breathing too fast. Sorry. I get like this when I'm nervous. I talk too much, offer coffee that no one asked for, rearrange things that don't. Things need to be organized. She was doing exactly that now, adjusting the architectural plans that were already perfectly stacked. Why are you nervous? He asked gently. Laura laughed, the sound coming out strained. Seriously? Are you really asking why I'm nervous when my boss, with whom I clearly have some unresolved sexual tension, is in my office at midnight, after spending the whole day creating situations that will make the entire office speculate about us? Unresolved sexual tension, Richard repeated, and there was something dangerous in his voice. So you feel it too? Laura froze, realizing too late what she had admitted. I didn't mean to. Don't lie. He took a step toward her, just one. We've passed the point of lying, Laura. Her heart was beating so fast that she was sure he could hear it. Okay, yes, I feel something, Attraction, tension, whatever you want to call it. But feeling doesn't mean acting. I can be attracted to you and still maintain professional boundaries. The two things aren't mutually exclusive. They're not, he agreed. But they also don't have to be mutually exclusive with exploring what this could be, outside of the office, away from prying eyes and gossip and corporate politics. How? Laura challenged. How exactly do we do that, Richard? You're the CEO. I report directly to you. There's no outside of the office for us. Everything is connected. He fell silent, clearly having no answer for that. Exactly, Laura said, sadness leaking into her voice. There's no easy answer. There's no way to do this without risks, without consequences, and I have a lot more to lose than you. The truth of that hung between them, ugly and undeniable. So what do we do? Richard asked, and for the first time he sounded lost. Not the confident CEO, not the man who always had an answer for everything, just a confused man trying to navigate feelings he didn't understand. Laura hugged herself, suddenly very aware that she was in pajamas, without makeup, completely vulnerable. We go back to our rules. You leave now. Tomorrow, we go back to being professionals. No glances, no unnecessary private meetings, no, she gestured vaguely, no this. And what if I can't? The question came out so low that she almost didn't hear it. Then you'll have to try harder, Laura replied, though each word hurt to say, because I'm not going to throw away years of hard work for something that might not even be real. It could just be chemistry, attraction based on proximity, a forbidden fantasy. We don't know. I know, Richard said with absolute conviction. But I understand that you might not. Not yet. The not yet hung in the air like a promise or a threat. Laura couldn't decide which. Richard finally grabbed his car keys for good this time. Thank you for letting me stay, and for being honest even when it was hard. Laura walked him to the door, keeping a safe distance. Thank you for the food, and for today. Even with all the complications, it was nice not to be alone. When she opened the door, Richard paused in the doorway. He looked at her for a long moment, as if memorizing every detail. The messy hair, the tired hazel eyes, the old college t-shirt, the bare feet. You're never really alone, Laura, he said softly. Even when it feels like you are, even when you force yourself to be. And then he left, the door closing softly behind him, leaving Laura alone in her small office with cold Chinese takeout and a heart that was dangerously out of rhythm. She leaned against the closed door, closing her eyes, and let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. What a mess, she whispered to the empty room. Total mess. And when she went to check on Emily one last time before trying to sleep, finding her daughter finally fever-free and sleeping peacefully, Laura realized that no matter how many rules she set, some things were as inevitable as gravity. And Richard Allen was quickly becoming one of them. The next morning arrived with the characteristic noise of New York waking up. Buses rumbling on the nearby avenue, street vendors announcing fresh bread, Laura's phone alarm ringing for the third time. She opened her eyes with difficulty, her head heavy from a restless night. She had stayed awake until 3 a.m, tossing in bed, her mind replaying every word, every glance, every tense moment from that night with Richard. "Mom?" Emily's faint voice came from the next room. Laura immediately got up, ignoring the momentary dizziness caused by only 4 hours of sleep. She entered her daughter's room and found the girl sitting up in bed, her brown hair tousled, forming a halo around her small face. But her eyes were brighter, her face less pale. "Hi, sweetheart. How are you feeling?" Laura sat on the edge of the bed, placing her hand on her daughter's forehead. "Normal temperature, thank God." "Better," Emily replied, rubbing her eyes. "But I'm really hungry. My tummy is rumbling," Laura smiled, the first genuine smile since the afternoon before. If Emily was hungry, it meant she was really better. Great sign! How about I make pancakes for breakfast? The banana ones you love? Emily's eyes lit up. With honey? With honey, Laura confirmed, kissing her daughter's forehead. But you're staying home today, okay? No school. I'll call Mrs. Thompson to see if she can watch you while I go to work. Mrs. Thompson was the neighbor from apartment 32, a retired 60-year-old lady who occasionally took care of Emily when Laura needed. It wasn't the ideal arrangement. Laura hated relying on favors, but it was better than leaving her daughter alone or missing work. But I wanted to stay with you, Emily pouted. You never... Stay home, Mom. The weight of family guilt tightened Laura's chest. I know, sweetheart, but Mommy has a very important meeting at work today, a meeting I can't miss. It was true. The final presentation of the Olympic Village project for the board was scheduled for 10 o'clock. But how about we do something special this weekend? Movie? Central Park? Is the nice man from the hospital coming too? Melissa asked with that devastating innocence of 7-year-olds. Laura froze, her hand still in her daughter's hair. The nice man from the hospital. That handsome gentleman who stayed with you in the waiting room when I had to be admitted. Melissa explained naturally. He gave me a teddy bear before we left. You don't remember? She remembered. Of course, she remembered. Richard had shown up at the hospital at 3 in the morning with coffee and food, sitting silently beside her for hours, and when Melissa woke up and started crying in fear of the tubes and machines, he had left and come back half an hour later with a teddy bear that probably cost more than Laura's rent. He's just a colleague from work, my love, Laura said, choosing her words carefully. He happened to be there. But he was nice, Melissa insisted. He didn't talk to me like I was silly, and he made you smile. You don't smile much when you're tired. The perception of a 7-year-old was sometimes frightening. Come on, let's make breakfast. Laura quickly changed the subject, reaching out her hand to her daughter. After that, you can watch some cartoons while I get ready for work. 2 hours later, Laura was on the crowded Green Line subway, squeezed between a student with an enormous backpack and a woman loudly discussing marital issues on her cell phone. She held onto the safety strap with one hand, while checking for the 5th time if the folder with the project plans was intact in her bag. The navy blazer, the same one Richard had mentioned she wore every Monday and Wednesday, was impeccable, pressed carefully the night before everything fell apart. Underneath, a simple white blouse, black tailored pants she had bought on sale at H&M, and medium-heeled shoes that were comfortable enough to last all day, but still looked professional. She had taken extra care with her appearance today, hair pulled back in an elegant bun, light but present makeup, foundation to hide dark circles, mascara, nude lipstick, discreet silver earrings that had belonged to her grandmother. She needed to look composed, professional, competent. She needed no one to look at her and see a woman who spent the night awake thinking about her boss. The cell phone vibrated in her pocket. A message. Her heart raced even before checking, as if she already knew who it was. Richard, good morning. How is Melissa? Laura looked at the message, her thumb hovering over the keyboard. Responding was crossing the line she had drawn the night before. Not responding was rude and would create even more tension. Laura, better. No fever, thanks for asking. Short, professional, confident. The reply came in seconds. That's great. See you at the 10 o'clock meeting. I'm looking forward to seeing your presentation. Nothing there was inappropriate, nothing any boss couldn't send to an employee. But Laura knew, she knew, there were layers of unspoken meaning in those simple words. She put her phone away without replying. Allen and Associates occupied 3 entire floors of a glass and steel office building on Fifth Avenue. Laura arrived at 8:40, her shoes clicking against the marble floor as she crossed the lobby. The receptionist, Carol, a young woman in her 20s who was always impeccable, greeted her with a smile that seemed different. "Good morning, Laura. Is everything better?" Carol asked, her eyes too curious. "Better?" Laura repeated, confused, stopping in front of the reception desk. "Your daughter," Carol clarified. "Sarah mentioned that you had to rush out yesterday because of an emergency with her. I hope it's nothing serious." So they were already talking. Of course they were. In an office of 80 employees, secrets lasted approximately 15 minutes. "Just a fever," Laura replied with a smile she hoped looked natural. "Nothing serious, thanks for asking." She headed for the elevators, but could feel Carol's eyes on her back. In the elevator she found Mark, the residential project supervisor, a man in his 40s with a beer belly and a permanently sour expression. "Laura," he greeted her with a nod. "I saw you left early yesterday. Personal issues." There was something in the way he said "personal issues" that made her skin crawl. "My daughter got sick," Laura replied, keeping her tone neutral. "But she's better now." Mark made that sound that meant nothing and everything at the same time. It must be hard to balance career and motherhood, especially with projects as important as the Olympic Village. It was a bait. Laura recognized it immediately. He was testing, looking for weaknesses. "I manage well," she said firmly. "My work has never been compromised by personal matters, and it won't be now." The elevator doors opened on the 18th floor, the architecture floor. Mark stepped out first, throwing over his shoulder. "I hope your presentation goes well today. It will be interesting to see how the board receives your project." The way he said "your project" sounded like the project that shouldn't be yours. Laura took a deep breath, counting to 5 before stepping out of the elevator. She wasn't going to let Mark or anyone else get into her head. Not today. The architecture workspace was a modern open space, shared desks, low partitions. The glass office, with natural light streaming through the huge windows, was located in the southwest corner, offering a partial view of Fifth Avenue. It wasn't the best position. Those were reserved for senior architects, but it was better than the desks in the middle with no windows at all. Laura had barely set her bag down under the desk when Sarah, one of the junior architects she sometimes lunched with, appeared beside her. "Dude, you missed the show last night," Sarah said in a low voice, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. She was 26, with bleached blonde hair done at home, and a refreshing honesty that Laura appreciated. "After you left, Alan just vanished. He cancelled all the afternoon meetings and had the secretary say he was unwell. Everyone's speculating." Laura's stomach dropped. Speculating about what? Sarah shrugged, but her eyes were sharp, curious. "Emily thinks he had a meltdown because Jake's project for the mall in East Side was rejected by the investors. Mark is saying it has to do with the internal audit starting next week, but Kate from reception..." She lowered her voice even more. "She swears it has to do with you." "With me?" Laura forced a laugh that sounded false even to her own ears. "Why on earth would it have anything to do with me?" "Because you left the meeting right after him, because he was looking at you when he broke that glass, because..." Sarah paused, studying Laura's face carefully. "Because everyone on the floor saw how he looks at you, Laura. And it's not the way a boss looks at an employee." There it was. The bomb that Laura knew would eventually explode. "That's ridiculous," Laura said, but her voice came out far too defensive. "Richard, Mr. Allen, he's professional. Anything people think they saw is just the imagination of those who have nothing better to do than gossip." "Hey, relax." Sarah raised her hands in surrender. "I'm not accusing anyone of anything. I personally think Kate and Emily are just jealous because you landed the Olympic Village project in less than a month at the firm, but—" She hesitated. "Just be careful, okay? You know how it is. A woman in a prominent position always has to prove herself twice as much. And if people start spreading that you have something going on with the boss—" "I have nothing with him," Laura cut in, her hands clenching into involuntary fists. "I work for him, that's all." A lie, a total lie. But what else could she say? Sarah nodded slowly. "Okay, I was just trying to warn you. You're great, Laura. I don't want to see you getting swallowed up by office politics." After Sarah returned to her own desk, Laura sank into her chair, her heart racing. So this was how it was. They were already talking, speculating, creating narratives. And she hadn't even done anything yet, nothing beyond accepting. A ride, letting him bring food, having a conversation. But you felt it, a treacherous voice in her mind whispered. You felt the tension, the attraction, the possibility of something more. And if you felt it, others noticed too. Laura powered on her computer with more force than necessary and opened the files for the Olympic Village project. She had 2 hours before the presentation. 2 hours to review every detail, prepare answers for potential questions, ensure her competence was so obvious, so undeniable that no one could attribute her success to anything but merit. She was so absorbed in the architectural drawings that she didn't notice when someone stopped next to her desk. Laura. She recognized that voice. She felt that voice down to her bones. Laura slowly looked up and found Richard standing beside her workstation, impeccable in a charcoal grey suit that probably cost more than the used car she had been saving for 2 years to buy. His hair was perfectly styled, yesterday's stubble shaved off, his eyes, her eyes, and all the breath in the office stopped. Laura could feel the stares. Sarah 3 desks to the left, frozen with a pen in the air. Mark stepping out of his office and pausing in the doorway. Emily literally turning her chair for a better view. Kate probably receiving a notification in the system that the CEO was on the architecture floor, something that happened maybe twice a month. "Mr. Allen," Laura said, forcing absolute professionalism into her voice, "how can I assist you?" If Richard noticed the audience, and he definitely did, he didn't show it. "I need to go over some details of your project before the 10 o'clock presentation. Can you come to my office?" It was a disguised order, and it was completely appropriate. CEOs reviewed important projects before presentations to the board all the time. But Laura knew, she knew, that it wasn't just that. "Sure," she replied, already standing up and grabbing the folder with the plans. "Let me just get my—" "I already have a copy of the digital files on my computer," Richard interrupted her. "I just need to clarify a few points about the cost structure." He turned and began walking toward the elevators without waiting for a response, expecting her to follow. Laura grabbed only a notebook and a pen, avoiding eye contact with anyone as she crossed the open space. She could feel the stares, could practically hear the mental gears turning, the speculations forming. In the elevator, alone for the first time since the night before, the silence was thick. "You shouldn't have done that," Laura said softly, staring intently at the numbers lighting up as they ascended. Richard had his office on the 22nd floor, the executive floor. "Done what?" "Review an important project before a crucial presentation." His voice was calm, but there was a current of tension beneath. "You know, exactly what." She turned to face him. "Coming down to my desk in front of everyone when you could have just sent an email asking me to come up. You created a spectacle. I treated you exactly as I would treat any other architect with an important presentation today." Richard retorted, but his eyes said otherwise. "That's a lie," Laura whispered. You never come down to the architecture floor to personally fetch an architect. Sarah has been here for 3 years and said you do that at most twice a year and only for the seniors. The elevator doors opened before Richard could respond. The 22nd floor was a stark contrast to the open space below. Quiet corridors with thick carpeting, solid wood doors with gold plaques, an air of contained power and old money. Richard's secretary, Marissa, a 50-year-old woman who had been with the company since before his father's death, looked up as they passed. Her eyes narrowed slightly upon seeing Laura, but she said nothing beyond a polite, "Good morning." Richard's office occupied the corner of the building, with floor-to-ceiling windows on 2 walls, offering a panoramic view of New York. The desk was dark mahogany, huge and impeccably organized. Behind it, shelves filled with books on architecture, engineering, and business. To the left, a seating area with leather sofas and a coffee table. To the right, a whole wall dedicated to models of completed projects. Skyscrapers, shopping malls, luxury condos. Richard closed the door behind them, and the click of the lock sounded too loud in the silence. "People are already talking," Laura said immediately, crossing her arms over her chest. "About yesterday, about how you look at me, about the fact that I get important projects so quickly. You showing up at my desk today only made it worse." "Laura, no!" She cut him off, the frustration of weeks finally spilling over. "No, you don't understand. Or maybe you do and just don't care because you're the CEO and can do whatever you want without consequences. But I can't. Every look, every conversation, every private meeting is scrutinized, dissected, turned into evidence that I don't deserve to be here." Richard walked around the desk but didn't approach her. "You deserve to be here more than anyone I've hired in the last 5 years. Your portfolio is exceptional. Your ideas are innovative. Your work is impeccable." "That doesn't matter," Laura practically shouted, and then quickly lowered her voice, remembering where she was. "It doesn't matter if everyone believes the only reason I'm here is that you want to take me to bed." The silence that followed was absolute. "Is that what they're saying?" Richard's voice came out dangerously low. "Not yet," Laura admitted. "But they will. It's only a matter of time. Kate is already speculating. Emily is watching. Mark is waiting for me to slip so he can say that he knew I wasn't as good as I seemed." She let herself fall into one of the visitor chairs in front of the desk, suddenly exhausted. "And the worst part is that I haven't done anything. Nothing happened between us. But I'm already being judged as if it did." Richard walked around the desk and sat on the edge, getting closer to her, but not intimidatingly so. "What do you want me to do, Laura? Just say it and I'll do it." "I want—" She started, then paused. What did she want? "I want you to stop looking at me like—" The words died in her throat. "Like what?" He gently pressed. "Like I'm the only person in the room," Laura finally said, her eyes filling with tears she refused to let fall. "Like nothing else matters. Like you—" She took a deep breath. "Like you feel something real for me, because if you do, Richard, it makes everything infinitely more complicated. I could handle desire. I could handle fleeting physical attraction. But if it's more than that—" She left the sentence unfinished, but they both knew how it ended. Richard was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was raw, stripped of all corporate armor. "What if it is more? What if I told you that every morning I wake up thinking about you, that I check my phone every 5 minutes, hoping you'll send me a message, that I made up 10 excuses yesterday to have John pick you up from school because the thought of you taking public transport with your sick daughter made me physically ill?" Laura closed her eyes. "Don't do this. Please don't do this." "Why? Because the truth makes everything harder." He stood up, starting to pace the office that contained energy spilling over. "Do you want me to lie? Do you want me to Pretend you're just another employee, just another project crossing my desk. I tried, Laura, I swear I tried. But then you do that thing with your hair when you're focused, or you defend your ideas with that fierce passion, or you smile at your daughter on the phone during lunch, thinking no one is watching, and I just... He stopped pacing, turning to face her. I just can't pretend anymore that you don't mean something to me. The tears Laura had been holding back finally escaped, one running down her cheek. She angrily wiped it away. You can't say those. They're things. You can't make me want something that will destroy everything I've built. So what do we do? Richard asked, echoing the same question from the night before. Because I will respect whatever you decide, Laura. If you want me to keep my distance, if you want to be transferred to report to someone else, if you want... He swallowed hard. If you want to resign and I'll give you the best letter of recommendation any architect has ever received. I promise. Whatever you need. Laura looked at him. Really looked. She saw the man behind the CEO, the vulnerable human behind the mask of power, and she saw something that scared her more than all the gossip and speculation combined. She saw that he was serious, that he truly felt something for her, something deep, something real, something that wouldn't simply disappear because it was inconvenient or dangerous. I don't want to resign, she finally said, and I don't want to be transferred. I want... She stood up, meeting his gaze. I want to prove to everyone in that building that I deserve to be here. I want my presentation today to be so flawless that even Mark can't find a flaw. I want the board to approve my project purely on merit. And then, after that, she paused, we'll figure out the rest. After, Richard repeated, and there was hope in his voice. After, Laura confirmed. First, I need to prove my worth, to them and to myself, because if we... She gestured between the two of them. If we try something now, I'll never know if I truly deserved it. There will always be that doubt. Richard nodded slowly, understanding. Then I'll wait. But Laura? About the presentation? He went back behind the desk, opening the laptop. I wasn't lying. I really need to go over a few points with you, because the board will eat you alive if you're not prepared for their questions. And so, for the next 90 minutes, they worked. It was strictly professional, Richard asking tough questions about costs, timelines, sustainability, return on investment. Laura answering each one with solid data, viable alternatives, growing confidence. When they finally stood up to head to the boardroom, Laura felt ready, until she left his office and found Emily, the secretary, looking at her with an expression that clearly said, I know exactly what's going on here. The judgment had already begun, and Laura's presentation would be just the beginning. The boardroom was intimidating by design. Located on the 23rd floor, one floor above Richard's office, it had a mahogany table that looked like it had been ripped from some 19th century European mansion, leather chairs that cost more than a compact car, and a panoramic view of New York through floor-to-ceiling windows. The air conditioning was set to 18 degrees, cold enough to keep everyone alert, uncomfortable. Laura entered the room at 9:55, 5 minutes before the scheduled time. Professionalism meant punctuality, and she wasn't going to give anyone a reason to question her. She carried her worn leather briefcase, a legacy from her grandmother that had served for years, and a USB drive with the digital presentation she had obsessively reviewed the night before. 3 of the 5 board members were already present. Edward Allen, Richard's uncle and the younger brother of the late founder, occupied the opposite head of the table from the empty chair that would be Richard's. He was 60 years old, with completely white hair slicked back, and a permanent expression, as if he were smelling something unpleasant. He wore a light beige suit, completely inappropriate for a serious business meeting, and Laura knew from hallway conversations that he only kept his position on the board because of his last name. His actual contributions to the company were non-existent. Next to him was Patricia Foster, the only woman on the board and the company's CFO. 52 years old, as slim as a runway model, with platinum blonde hair pulled into a bun so tight it looked painful. She wore a black business dress that was probably Chanel, and reading glasses hanging from a gold chain. Her blue eyes, certainly contact lenses, because no one in New York had naturally blue eyes like that, scanned Laura from head to toe in 2 seconds, cataloguing and judging every detail. The third present was Chen Wei, a Chinese investor who had joined the board 3 years ago when the company opened up to foreign investments. He was about 45, impeccably polite, and spoke English with a slight accent that made it hard to discern whether he genuinely didn't understand something or was just pretending to observe how people explained themselves. "Good morning," Laura greeted, her voice coming out firm despite the nerves churning in her stomach. "Laura Miller, the architect responsible for the Olympic Village project." "Yes, we know who you are," Edward said, not bothering to stand to greet her. "Sit there." He pointed to a chair in the middle of the table, not at the head, a position that placed her as subordinate, not as the presenter. Laura sat down, refusing to show that the disrespect had affected her. She began to take out the plans from her briefcase when the door opened again. Richard entered, followed by 2 other board members, Mark Taylor, the company's corporate lawyer for 20 years, a 58-year-old black man with a reputation for being absolutely impartial and brutally honest, and Sophia Anderson, a senior architect who had been promoted to the board the previous year, 37 years old, intimidatingly beautiful, with straight brown hair down to her waist and an MBA from Harvard that she mentioned at least 3 times in every meeting. Laura's eyes met Richard's for a fraction of a second. He gave a nearly imperceptible nod. Encouragement, support, something that warmed her chest despite the artificial cold of the room. "Good morning, everyone," Richard said, taking his place at the head of the table. He opened a folder, pulling out reading glasses that Laura had never seen him use. Glasses that made him look older, more serious, more inaccessible. "We are here for the final presentation of the residential project, Luxury Olympic Village, developed by architect Laura Miller." Laura has been with the company for 3 weeks, but her portfolio impressed the entire architecture board during the selection process. This is her first major project with us, and the preliminary numbers are promising. Promising. Not excellent or exceptional. Promising. Laura noticed the careful choice of words. Richard was being deliberately neutral, showing no favoritism. 3 weeks, Patricia repeated, taking off her glasses and letting them dangle from the chain. "Quite fast to receive an $80 million project, don't you think, Richard?" The first arrow had been launched. "The project was awarded based on demonstrated competence," Richard replied calmly. Laura presented an unsolicited proposal for optimizing space usage in residential projects during her second week. The proposal would save approximately 12% in construction costs without compromising quality or usable area. When the land in Olympic Village became available, she was the natural choice to lead the project. Natural choice. Sophia, the board architect, repeated with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Interesting. Considering we have architects with 10, 15 years of experience who could also have led this project." Laura felt her blood boil, but maintained a neutral expression. "With all due respect, Dr. Sophia, I would be happy to compare my proposal with any others that have been presented for this site. If there is a better one, I would personally recommend it be chosen." The silence that followed was tense. Sophia leaned forward, her eyes shining with something that seemed like genuine interest mixed with malice. Bold. I like that. Very well, Laura. Show us what you have. Laura stood up, connecting the USB drive to the projector. The first image appeared on the large screen behind her, a 3D rendering of the residential complex viewed from above, 3 glass and steel towers curving like waves, connected by hanging gardens that formed an organic pattern between the buildings. The Olympic Village project consists of 3 high-end residential towers, each with 28 floors. Laura began, her voice gaining confidence as she entered the familiar territory of the work she loved. A total of 126 units, ranging from 150 square meter apartments to 400 square meter duplex penthouses. The differentiator of this project is not just the aesthetics, although I believe that organic architecture inspired by natural elements is visually stunning, but the integration of sustainability with luxury, something the high-end market is increasingly demanding. She clicked to the next slide, showing cross-sections of the buildings. Each tower has been positioned to maximize natural cross-ventilation, reducing the need for air conditioning by approximately 40%. The hanging gardens are not just decorative. They function as additional thermal insulation and a rainwater drainage system that feeds the irrigation of common areas. Solar panels on top of each tower generate enough energy to cover 100% of the lighting in common areas and 30% of the average consumption of each unit. Costs? Patricia interrupted, pen already in hand. Laura was prepared. Total estimated construction cost is $72 million. This includes luxury finishes, home automation technology in all units, and the sustainable systems I mentioned. The land has already been acquired for $8 million. Total investment, $80 million. Return, Edward asked, finally showing some interest. Units priced between $2 and $7 million, depending on size and floor. Laura clicked to a slide showing market analysis. Market research indicates that luxury sustainable apartments in this region are selling 22% above similar conventional developments. Selling all units, and the demand analysis suggests we would sell at least 90% before completion. We would be talking about gross revenue of $450 million, estimated net profit $200 million. The numbers hung in the room like a physical blow. David Chen, who had remained silent until then, leaned forward. These numbers are ambitious, very ambitious. In China, we see sustainable projects fail because they cost too much to build, and consumers do not pay a premium enough to justify the investment. With all due respect, Mr. Chen, New York is not Shanghai, Laura replied, keeping her tone respectful but firm. The luxury market in the US has unique characteristics. Our high-end consumers are increasingly environmentally conscious, but also extremely demanding in terms of quality. They want sustainability, yes, but they are not willing to sacrifice comfort or status. This project offers both. She clicked to the next slide, showing demographic research. I conducted an informal survey with 50 potential buyers in the target income range, business people, executives, professionals. 84% said they would pay a premium of 20 to 30% for a property that significantly reduced their energy and water costs, as long as it did not compromise luxury or location. Informal survey, Sophia repeated, seizing the word. Not exactly scientific methodology, is it? No, Laura admitted without hesitation. But it's more research than most luxury projects do before starting. We usually assume we know what the market wants. I prefer to ask. Mark, the lawyer who had been silent, let out a short laugh. She has a point. Sophia did not seem pleased with this, but gestured for Laura to continue. The next 45 minutes were a marathon of technical questions, financial inquiries, and direct challenges to Laura's experience. Edward asked about construction timelines. She had detailed schedules. Patricia questioned financial risks. She had sensitivity analyses, showing that even selling only 70% of the units, they would still make a profit. Sophia challenged specific architectural choices. Laura defended each one with solid technical arguments and references to similarly successful international projects. Richard remained almost completely silent throughout the presentation, asking only 3 questions that Laura knew they were for the benefit of the other board members, not because he needed the answers. They had already discussed all of this during the morning review. She was doing well. Laura could feel it. Even Sophia, who clearly wanted to find faults, was starting to look impressed against her will. And then Edward asked the question Laura feared. "One last question, Laura," he said, leaning back in his chair with a smile that conveyed no warmth. "You have 3 weeks with the company. Before that, you worked in a small office in West Village doing residential renovations. Your largest previous project was a 4,000-square-foot townhouse in Greenwich Village. And now you want us to believe that you have the experience and knowledge to lead an $80 million venture?" There it was, the question that summarized all the unspoken doubts, all the whispered speculations. Laura took a deep breath. She could defend herself, list her qualifications, mention the awards she had won in college. Or she could be honest in a way that could either destroy her or save her. She chose honesty. "You are right," Laura said, and saw surprise pass over Edward's face. "I do not have experience leading projects of this magnitude. My portfolio is modest compared to the senior architects here. And yes, there is a risk in giving me this opportunity." She paused, letting the words settle. "But I have also spent 6 years working on projects that no one else wanted, renovations in tiny apartments where I had to make 3 rooms work in the space of 1, townhouses on irregular lots where every inch had to be maximized, projects with budgets so tight that I had to come up with creative solutions because we couldn't afford the conventional ones." Her voice was rising in intensity, years of frustration and determination finally finding an outlet. "And do you know what I learned? I learned that architecture is not about having the largest budget or the easiest site. It's about solving problems. It's about taking limitations and turning them into features. It's about seeing possibilities where others see obstacles." She looked directly at Edward, then at each board member. "You are right to question my experience, but experience is not just about accumulated years or the size of previous projects. It's about how many problems you have solved, how many times you had to be creative with limited resources, how many nights you stayed awake redesigning something for the 10th time because you knew it could be better." She gestured to the screen behind her. "This project, every line, every calculation, every choice, represents not 3 weeks of work. It represents 6 years of learning in trenches that architects from large firms have never stepped into. It represents hundreds of small projects that taught me more about spatial efficiency and resource optimization than any luxury venture could." The silence in the room was absolute. "So yes, it is a risk to choose me," Laura concluded, her voice returning to a normal but still firm tone. "But it is a calculated risk, based on demonstrated potential and a hunger to prove my worth. And I assure you, I will work harder than anyone in this company to ensure that this project is an absolute success." She sat down, her heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. Edward was the first to break the silence. "Well," he said, and for the first time there was something resembling respect in his voice. "At least you are honest." "I make a motion," Mark said suddenly. "I propose that we approve the Olympic Village project as presented, with Laura Miller remaining as the lead architect under the supervision of Dr. Sophia to ensure that company standards are upheld." Laura felt her stomach sink. Dr. Sophia's supervision meant every decision would be questioned, every choice needing justification, but it also meant approval. The project would be approved. "I second the motion," David Chen said. "All in favor?" Richard asked. His voice neutral, professional. 4 hands went up. Mark, David, Richard, and surprisingly, Patricia. Sophia hesitated for a long moment, her eyes fixed on Laura. Then slowly, her hand went up too. "Unanimously approved," Richard announced. "The Olympic Village project moves to the detailed planning phase. Laura, you will report progress weekly to the board through Sophia until the completion of the executive project." It was only then that Laura realized she'd been holding her breath. She let it out in a shaky sigh. "Thank you," she said, her voice almost breaking. "Thank you for your trust. I won't disappoint." "You better not disappoint," Edward said, but there was a hint of humor now. "Because if you do, I will personally remind you of this speech about experience and hard work." The meeting was officially adjourned. People began to rise, gathering papers and laptops. Laura remained seated for a moment, needing to process what had just happened. She did it. Against all odds, against all doubts, she had done it. "Laura." Sophia's voice came from her side. The senior architect was standing next to her chair, an unreadable expression on her face. "You did well. Better than I expected, honestly." "Thank you, Dr. Sophia." "Just Sophia," the architect corrected. "If we are going to work together, no unnecessary formalities. And let's be clear, I will supervise you closely, not because I doubt you, but because $80 million is a lot of money to risk on modesty, no matter how talented you are." "I understand, and I appreciate it," Laura said honestly. Sophia nodded, already turning to leave, but then paused, looking over her shoulder. "One more thing. Whatever is going on between you and Richard, and don't look at me like that, I have eyes. Be careful. He may be CEO now, but the politics of this company are brutal, and women always pay higher prices than men in these arrangements." Before Laura could respond, Sophia had already left the room. One by one, the board members were leaving. David with a polite wave, Mark with a firm handshake, and a "good job, Patricia." Without saying anything, but also without hostility, Edward was the last of the others to leave, stopping at the door. "You remember my brother," he said suddenly. "The father of Richard. He also had that hunger, that need to prove something. Just be careful that this hunger doesn't consume you, girl. My brother died at 63 with an empire and no real personal life to show for it." And then he too left, leaving only Laura and Richard in the large room. The silence between them was different now, charged not with sexual tension or unresolved conflict, but with something more complex, mutual respect perhaps, shared pride. "You were incredible," Richard finally said, and there was genuine admiration in his voice. "When Edward asked that question, I thought you would get defensive or try to downplay your limitations, but you did. The opposite. You owned them and turned them into strength." Laura stood up, starting to gather her things. "I learned a long time ago that lying about limitations just bites you back later. Better to be honest from the start." "Well," Richard stepped closer, but kept a respectful distance, "you just proved something, to them and hopefully to yourself. You deserve to be here. You deserve this project, and whatever happens between us, or doesn't happen, doesn't change that." Laura looked at him, really looked at him. Throughout the entire presentation, he had been impeccably professional. He hadn't shown favoritism. He hadn't overly defended her. He hadn't done anything that could be interpreted as inappropriate protection. He had let her sink or swim on her own, and she had swum. "Thank you," she said softly, "for letting me do this alone. For not intervening, not trying to defend me or make it easier. I needed that." "I know," Richard replied. "And now, Now, Laura picked up her folder. I go back to my desk and start the detailed planning. I have 3 months to have the complete executive project ready for city approval, and I have to work under Sophia's supervision, who will clearly review every comma with a magnifying glass. She's tough, Richard admitted, but she's fair, and she's the best architect this company has. If you can get her approval, you can get anyone's. Laura nodded, walking toward the door. When her hand touched the doorknob, his voice stopped her. Laura? She turned around. What you said earlier, about waiting until you prove your worth before we figure out the rest. He paused. You proved it. Today. To everyone in that room and hopefully to yourself. Laura's heart raced. Richard, I'm not asking for anything, he said quickly. I'm just saying, you don't owe anything to anyone anymore. You earned your place here based on pure merit, so whatever you decide about us, about me, let it be because you want to, not because you feel you need to prove something first. Laura stood there, her hand still on the doorknob, her chest tight with emotions she wasn't ready to name. I need to think, she finally said, about everything, but... She took a deep breath. But thank you for respecting that, for giving me space to figure out what I want, not just reacting to what you want. A sad smile appeared on his face. Always. Laura left the meeting room, gently closing the door behind her. In the quiet hallway of the 13th floor, she leaned against the wall for a moment, letting the adrenaline from the presentation finally drain from her system. She had done it. Against all odds, she had done it. But as she walked toward the elevators, Laura couldn't stop thinking about Sophia's words. Women always pay higher prices in these arrangements. And Edward's words, that hunger doesn't consume you. And more importantly, Richard's words, let it be because you want. The elevator arrived. Laura stepped in, pressed the button for the 18th floor, and watched the doors close. She had 3 months to complete the executive project. 3 months to work under Sophia's demanding supervision. 3 months to prove that today's approval hadn't been a mistake. And somewhere in the midst of all this, she had to figure out what to do with her growing feelings for a man who could both elevate her career and destroy it completely. When the elevator doors opened on the 18th floor, Laura straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and walked out with the confidence of someone who had just conquered the world, at least for today. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but today she had won, and that, for now, was enough. The month of February in New York brought with it the characteristic sweltering heat of summer, temperatures nearing 95 degrees, humid air sticking to the skin, and afternoons of torrential rain that flooded streets and paralyzed traffic for hours. Laura barely noticed. She was so immersed in the Olympic Village project that the days blended into an endless sequence of technical drawings, meetings with structural engineers, reviews with Sophia, and nights working late at her desk while Emily slept in the next room. It was 7:30 on a Friday when Laura finally lifted her eyes from the computer screen and realized the office was practically empty. The automatic lights had already turned off at most workstations, leaving only the emergency lighting and the glow of her monitor creating a small circle of brightness in the dark open space. "Are you still here?" Camilla's voice made her jump in her chair. Laura turned around, finding her colleague standing behind her with a large bag on her shoulder and a look of concern on her face. What time is it?" 7:30, Camilla replied, walking around the desk to look at Laura's screen. Architectural drawings in complex layers filled the monitor, elevations showing every detail of the natural ventilation system that Laura was developing. "Laura, you've been here since 7 in the morning. That's almost 13 hours straight." "I stopped for lunch," Laura said, but even as she spoke, she realized it was a lie. She had eaten half a sandwich at her own desk while reviewing thermal load calculations. Sarah sighed, pulling a chair from a nearby station and sitting down. Look, I get it. Important project. First big opportunity, a lot of pressure, but you're going to kill yourself working like this, and for God's sake, you have a daughter at home. The family guilt tightened in Laura's chest. Melissa had been with Mrs. Thompson since 6:30. The neighbor had called at 5, asking if Laura would be late, and Laura had promised that she would be home by 7 to pick up the girl. Damn! Laura abruptly closed her laptop, already grabbing her bag. I promised I would pick her up at 7. Mrs. Thompson has a doctor's appointment early tomorrow and needs to sleep early. And breathe. Sarah placed her hand on Laura's arm, interrupting the anxious flow of words. Call her. Explain that you're on your way. 5 more minutes won't make a difference. Laura grabbed her phone, her hands trembling slightly as she dialed. Mrs. Thompson answered on the second ring. Laura, my dear, is everything okay? Mrs. Thompson, I'm so sorry. The words came out in a desperate rush. I lost track of time at work. I'm leaving now. I'll be there in 40 minutes at the most. Calm down, dear. The woman's voice was gentle, patient. Melissa is fine. She had dinner, took a bath. She's here watching a cartoon. You can come slowly, no need to rush. I don't want you getting into an accident because you're in a hurry. I'm so sorry. This won't happen again, I promise. Laura. Mrs. Thompson interrupted her firmly. You are a wonderful mother and a tireless worker, but you are also human. Sometimes things get delayed. It's okay. Now hang up that phone, go pick up your girl, and stop punishing yourself so much. When Laura hung up, she realized there were tears in her eyes. Sarah was looking at her with a mix of understanding and concern. You're killing yourself, Sarah said softly, and I understand why. I saw how people looked at you after that presentation to the board, half the office admiring, the other half looking for reasons to prove it was luck or, she hesitated, or favoritism. Laura bitterly finished, wiping her eyes. You can say it. I know what they're saying. Emily isn't helping, Sarah admitted. She's spreading that you and Richard have something going on. She says she saw you leaving his office 3 times last week. Those were meetings about the project, Laura defended herself, frustration overflowing. Sophia is reviewing everything I do, and when she finds something questionable, I have to go to Richard, Mr. Allen, to explain the design choices. It's completely professional. I know that, Sarah said quickly, but you know Emily. She had that affair with the marketing director 2 years ago and almost got fired for it. Now she projects her own mistakes onto everyone. Laura grabbed her bag with more force than necessary. I don't have time to deal with office gossip. I have to deliver the complete executive project in 2 months. I have a daughter I can barely see because I live here, and I have Sophia Anderson reviewing every line I draw as if I were an incompetent intern. Sophia is tough on everyone. Sarah tried to console her. It's not personal. It feels personal, Laura murmured, already walking towards the elevators. It feels very personal. The apartment in Brooklyn was quiet when Laura finally arrived with Melissa at 9:15. The girl had fallen asleep in the rideshare, her head heavy on her mother's lap, and Laura had to carry her up the stairs, a task that was getting harder as Melissa grew. After placing her daughter in bed, carefully changing her clothes so as not to wake her, and kissing her warm forehead from the summer heat, Laura returned to the living room. She looked at the coffee table, the same one where Richard had brought Chinese food 4 weeks ago. It felt like a lifetime ago. Her phone vibrated. A message. Richard. John said you just left the office. It's almost 10 p.m., Laura. She looked at the screen, torn between irritation and something warmer she didn't want to name. Richard had started asking John, who now spent a good part of the day parked at the company building, to inform him when Laura was working late. She should find that invasive, controlling. Instead, a treacherous part of her found it comforting, as if someone was paying attention, caring. Laura, the project won't design itself. Richard, you also won't work alone if you collapse from exhaustion. Laura, I'm fine. Richard, that's a lie. You're working 14 hours a day, skipping meals, carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders because you think any slip will give ammunition to the people who want to see you fail. Laura stared at the message for a long moment. How did he know? How did he always know exactly what was going on in her head? Laura, and how do you know this? Richard, because I did the same thing when I took over the company after my father died. I worked until I almost had a nervous breakdown at 35 because I thought any weakness would be used against me. It took my sister finding me passed out in the office at 3 a.m. for me to realize I was killing myself for nothing. Laura didn't know how to respond to that. Richard's vulnerability still caught her by surprise, those moments when he let the CEO mask drop and showed the real man underneath. Richard, have you had dinner yet? Laura, I'm going to make something now. Richard, that's lie number 2. You're going to collapse into bed because... Laura was exhausted and was going to sleep without eating. Tomorrow she would wake up with a headache and an empty stomach. Laura, you can't just show up here with food again. Richard, I won't, but I had something delivered. It should arrive in 15 minutes. Laura looked at her phone in disbelief. Laura. Richard. Richard. It's from that Japanese place you like. Salmon because you always order salmon, and that strawberry roll for dessert that you mentioned once was your favorite. Laura, you can't do this. Richard, why not? Laura, because people are already talking, because this crosses lines, because you're confusing me. The cursor blinked for a long moment before the response appeared. Richard, sorry, you're right. I'll cancel the order. Laura looked at the message, feeling something tighten in her chest. She should let it go. She should be grateful he respected the boundaries. She should go to bed and ignore her growling stomach and the loneliness that consumed her every night. Instead, her fingers typed, "Don't cancel." Richard, are you sure? Laura, no, but I'm too hungry to care. Richard, then eat, sleep, and stop trying to carry everything alone. Sometimes accepting help isn't weakness, it's wisdom. Laura didn't respond. She simply held the phone against her chest, eyes closed, allowing herself for a moment to imagine what it would be like, not carrying everything alone, having someone who paid attention, who cared, who showed up even if just virtually when she needed it. 15 minutes later, the doorbell rang. The delivery person had a large thermal bag from the best Japanese restaurant in the area, the kind of place where Laura looked at the menu online but never ordered because a meal cost half her weekly food budget. She opened the containers on the coffee table. Fresh salmon sashimi that practically melted in her mouth, spicy tuna temaki, uramaki with cream cheese, still warm gyoza. And yes, those strawberry rolls with white chocolate that she had mentioned exactly once, 3 weeks ago, during a casual conversation about favorite foods in the office coffee room. He had remembered. Of course he had remembered. Richard seemed to catalogue every detail about her, storing information as if each piece were precious. Laura ate slowly, savouring each bite, and tried not to think too much about what it meant to accept food from him. She tried not to calculate how much it had cost. She tried not to wonder if it made them something beyond boss and employee. When she finished, she picked up the phone again. Laura, thank you. It was delicious. And you were right. I wasn't going to eat anything and would wake up with a headache tomorrow. Richard, I'm usually right. It's annoying, I know. For the first time in days, Laura laughed, a low, genuine sound. Laura, yes, It's quite annoying. Richard. Have a good weekend, Laura. Try to rest a bit. The project can wait 48 hours. Laura. Good night, Richard. She put the phone down and went to take a shower. As the hot water cascaded over her tense shoulders, relaxing muscles she didn't even realize she was contracting, Laura allowed herself to think the unthinkable. What if she stopped fighting? What if she admitted, at least to herself, that she had developed real feelings for Richard Allen? Not just physical attraction or gratitude for the professional opportunity, but something deeper, more dangerous. She liked how he saw her, not just as a mother or architect, but as a complete person. She liked how he respected her boundaries even when he clearly wanted to cross them. She liked how he remembered small details, like strawberry rolls and cinnamon coffee, but liking him wasn't enough, not when so much was at stake. Monday arrived with the violence of an alarm clock ringing at 5:30 in the morning. Laura was at the office by 7, determined to make progress on the facade detailing before her meeting with Sophia, scheduled for 10. She had barely sat down when Sarah appeared next to her desk, her face pale. "Laura, did you see?" "See what?" Sarah lowered her voice, looking around nervously. "Emily. She filed a formal complaint with HR." Laura's stomach dropped. "Complaint about what?" "About you and Richard," Sarah whispered. "She alleges there's inappropriate favoritism, that you're receiving special treatment, that there's questionable behavior between you two." Laura felt the blood drain from her face. "She can't. There's nothing going on." "I know that," Sarah said quickly, "and everyone with half a brain knows that, but the company has that new policy. Any allegation of inappropriate relationships between superiors and subordinates needs to be investigated. It's automatic after last year's scandal." "Investigated," Laura repeated, the word sounding distant, surreal. "Investigated how?" "Interviews with witnesses, review of emails and corporate messages, analysis of hiring and promotion decisions." Sarah paused. "Laura, they're going to comb through everything. Every conversation, every meeting, every project you received. If there's anything that could seem inappropriate..." Laura couldn't hear the rest. Her mind was racing, cataloguing every interaction with Richard. The private meetings, all about work, but too frequent to be normal. The ride home the night Emily got sick, logged by the building's security system, no doubt. The text messages, had he used his corporate phone or personal? She didn't even know. "When does the investigation start?" she managed to ask. "Today. The HR director already sent an email calling you in for a meeting at 2 in the afternoon. Laura looked at her computer screen, at the designs she had stayed late working on, at the project that was consuming all her energy and passion, and realized that everything, absolutely everything, was about to come crashing down, not because of something she had done, but because of something she had felt, because of glances that lasted a second too long, because of attention that was a little too intense, because of... There was a connection that existed despite all efforts to deny it. "I need to talk to him," Laura said, already getting up. "Laura, no!" Sarah grabbed her arm. "Any communication between you two now will look suspicious, you trying to coordinate stories, or worse." "So what do I do?" Laura heard the desperation in her own voice. "Do I just sit here and wait while they dig through my life? While they prove that I don't deserve to be, hear that it was all favoritism, that I am exactly what Emily is saying I am?" "You are not," Sarah said firmly, "and they will find that out. You have the talent, you have the work, you have the results. The truth will come out." Laura wanted to believe. God, how she wanted to believe. But she had lived long enough to know that sometimes the truth wasn't enough. Sometimes perception won, and perception at that moment was firmly against her. The 4 hours between the conversation with Sarah and the meeting with HR were the longest of Laura's life. She tried to work, tried to focus on the technical drawings that needed to be finished, but the lines on the screen kept blurring, her hands trembled imperceptibly over the mouse, and her mind wouldn't stop creating increasingly worse scenarios. Termination. Lawsuit. Her name permanently stained in the industry. Back to the office in West Village. If they would even take her back after a scandal. Emily asking why Mummy was sad. Why they had to move to a smaller apartment, why everything had changed. At 10 in the morning, the meeting with Sophia was cancelled. A short email, no explanation. We will reschedule soon. Laura knew why. Sophia had probably been informed about the investigation and was distancing herself, protecting herself from being associated with a possible controversy. At 11:30, Laura saw Richard cross the architecture open space. He didn't look in her direction, not once, but she noticed the tension in his shoulders, his jaw clenched, the way his hands were balled into fists inside his pants pockets. He knew. Of course he knew. At noon, Jake, the project manager who had been mysteriously transferred, appeared in the office. Laura saw him, talking to Mark near the meeting room, both casting glances in her direction. Her stomach sank. Had they called him back? To testify about what exactly? About shared laughs during team lunches? About the day Richard broke the glass during the meeting? Sarah brought a sandwich at 1 o'clock, insisting that Laura needed to eat. Laura managed to swallow half before giving up, the knot in her stomach making it impossible to process food. At 1:45, she grabbed her bag and headed to the 21st floor, where the HR department was located. The hallway was empty, silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioning. Laura paused in front of the door with the sign, Maria Johnson, HR Director, took a deep breath 3 times, and knocked. "Come in." The room was smaller than Laura expected, but impeccably organized. Maria Johnson was sitting behind a glass desk, a woman in her early 40s with short black hair, square-framed glasses, and a neutral expression that revealed absolutely nothing. Next to her, a younger man, probably in his 30s, with an open laptop and a pen in hand. "Laura Miller, right?" Maria gestured to the chair in front of the desk. "Please have a seat. This is Ricardo, our HR assistant. He will be taking notes during our conversation." Laura sat down, her hands clasped in her lap. "I received the email about the investigation." "Yes." Maria adjusted her glasses, opening a physical folder on the desk. "I will be direct with you, Laura. A formal complaint has been filed alleging inappropriate relationship between you and the CEO, Richard Allen, and possible favoritism resulting from that relationship. As you should know, the company's policy is very clear about relationships between superiors and direct subordinates." "I know the policy," Laura said, forcing her voice to remain steady, "and I am not violating it. There is no inappropriate relationship." Maria nodded, making a note. "I understand, but I need to ask some questions to clarify the situation. You are aware that everything said here is confidential, but may be used in the investigation?" "I am." "Great." Maria crossed her hands on the desk. "First, when was the last time you had contact with Mr. Allen outside of the workplace?" Laura felt her face heat up. "Define outside of the workplace." "Social gatherings, dinners, any interaction that is not strictly professional. Within the company premises." Laura's mind raced. Richard showing up at the hospital. Richard bringing Chinese food at midnight. The ride on the night Emily got sick. He offered me a ride once," Laura said slowly. "My daughter got sick at school and I needed to pick her up urgently. Mr. Allen offered his car to get me there faster." "When was that?" "About 5 weeks ago." Maria made another note. "And that was the only time?" Laura hesitated. Lying would be worse if they found out later. "He also showed up at my house that night, brought food, because he thought I hadn't eaten. Stayed for about an hour and then left. Ricardo stopped typing for a second, exchanging a meaningful glance with Maria. He went to your house, Maria repeated, without inflection, at night, and stayed for an hour. My daughter was sick, Laura defended herself, frustration leaking into her voice. I was alone, scared, and he was kind. That's all. Nothing happened. Nothing inappropriate. Laura, Maria said with a professional patience that somehow felt worse than a direct accusation, do you understand how this looks? A CEO going to a newly hired employee's house at night, staying for an hour? Do you understand why this raises concerns? Questions? I understand how it looks, Laura admitted, her hands now visibly trembling, but understanding how it looks doesn't change what really happened. He brought food, we talked about work and life, and then he left. That's all. You talked about work and life, Maria wrote something down. That suggests a level of personal intimacy that goes beyond the professional. Or it suggests two humans having a normal conversation, Laura shot back, losing her patience. Can't I be honest without it being used against me? Should I lie and say we never had any interaction outside the office, because I can do that, if that's what you want to hear? No one wants you to lie, Maria said firmly. We want the truth, all of it. Laura took a deep breath, forcing herself to calm down. The truth is that Richard, Mr. Allen, has been considerate, more considerate than a typical boss would be, but he has never, not once, made any inappropriate advances. He has never touched me inappropriately, never suggested that I should reciprocate his attention in any way, never conditioned my work or projects on any kind of personal relationship. But you received special treatment, Maria pointed out. 3 weeks at the company, and you were already leading an $80 million project. That's unusual. It's unusual because I'm good at what I do, Laura practically shouted, then lowered her voice, aware of how defensive she sounded. Look at my portfolio. Look at the presentation I made for the board. Look at the technical reviews from Sophia Anderson. She's the toughest supervisor in this company, and even she couldn't find real flaws in my work. I got this project because I earned it, not because I'm sleeping with anyone. No one is accusing you of sleeping with the CEO, Maria corrected. No, Laura challenged. Then what exactly are you insinuating? Because the message I'm getting is very clear. A woman can only achieve quick success if there's a powerful man behind her. God forbid I'm just talented. Maria and Richard exchanged another look. Laura, Maria said, her voice softening slightly. I understand your frustration, but you need to understand that these policies exist for good reasons. We had a serious case last year. A manager who used her position to coerce a subordinate into a relationship. It was ugly. Since then, the company takes any allegations very seriously. I understand that, Laura said, but I'm not that person. And Richard is not that person. He would never use power against anyone like that. Are you sure about that? Maria asked gently. Because from what I'm understanding, you've only known him for 6 weeks. And there it was. The question Laura had been avoiding asking herself. Did she really know Richard, or did she only know the version of him that he chose to show? Laura started, then stopped. I know what I saw. I know he could have pressured me dozens of times and chose not to. I know that when I set boundaries, he respected them. I know he let me sink or swim on my own during the presentation to the board without intervening or defending me. If he were trying to manipulate or control me, those would not be the actions he would take. Maria took more notes. Do you exchange personal messages outside the corporate system? Laura's heart raced. The messages about food, about Emily, about him worrying about her working too late. Yes, occasionally. How often? I don't know, maybe once or twice a week. About what? Laura hesitated again. About work, mostly. Sometimes about my daughter. He asks how she is. Your boss regularly asks about your daughter through personal messages. Maria let that hang in the air. And doesn't that seem to you to cross professional boundaries? It seemed considerate, Laura said defensively. It seemed like someone caring about another human being. Or it could seem like a man in a position of power establishing emotional intimacy with a subordinate, Maria countered. Laura, you're seeing this from the perspective of someone in the middle of the situation. I need to look at it from the outside, objectively, and objectively, what I see is a pattern of behavior that crosses professional lines multiple times. The words hit Laura like physical blows, because Maria was right. Viewed from the outside, objectively, it looked exactly like she was describing. So what happens now? Laura asked, her voice coming out small. Now I talk to Mr. Allen. I talk to other witnesses, co-workers, people who observed interactions between you. I review corporate emails, meeting records, project decisions, and then I make a recommendation to the board about whether or not there was a policy violation. And if you determine that there was, Maria looked at her with something that could be compassion, then there would be consequences for both of you. But we'll get there if we get there. For now, you can go back to work, but I would strongly recommend that you minimize any unnecessary interaction with Mr. Allen during the investigation. Laura stood up on shaky legs. Anything else? Just one more question, Maria said. Honestly, Laura, if you could do it all over again, would you change anything about how you conducted your interactions with Mr. Allen? Laura stood there, her hand on her bag's handle, considering the question. She should say yes. She should say that she would have kept strict distance, refused help, established clearer boundaries from the start. Instead, she heard her own voice saying, no, because despite everything, he saw me, really saw me. And I'm not going to apologize for allowing someone to care when I've spent years convinced I had to carry everything alone. The silence that followed was heavy. Thank you for your honesty, Maria finally said. You may go. Laura returned to her desk in a daze. The open space was fuller now. Lunch hour had passed and people were coming back. She could feel the stares, the barely concealed whispers. Everyone knew. Of course, everyone knew. She was trying to focus on a structural drawing when a shadow fell over her desk. Laura? She looked up and found Sophia Anderson standing there, a folder under her arm and an unreadable expression on her face. Sophia. Laura straightened in her chair. Today's meeting was cancelled. I'm not here about the meeting. Sophia interrupted her. Can I talk to you in private? Laura nodded, following Sophia to one of the small meeting rooms at the edges of the open space. As soon as the glass door closed, Sophia turned to face her. I know about the investigation, Sophia said directly. Maria interviewed me an hour ago. Laura's stomach dropped. And you said... I told the truth. Sophia crossed her arms. That your work is exceptional. That every review I've done of your designs showed rare technical competence. That you work more hours than any junior architect I've ever supervised. That if favoritism is happening, it's not reflected in the quality of your work, because you would deliver the same level of excellence regardless of who your supervisor was. Laura felt tears threaten to rise. Thank you, Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Sophia said, but her voice softened. Because I also said that I've observed tension between you and Richard. Tension that goes beyond the professional. I don't know if you two are romantically involved, and frankly, it's none of my business. But I said that if you are, you've been extremely discreet and professional about it in the workplace. Laura opened her mouth to deny it, but the words died. What was the point? Sophia was too smart for lies. "We're not," Laura started. "Nothing happened, but—" She took a deep breath. "But there is something neither of us asked for or planned, and I don't know what to do with it." Sophia studied her face for a long moment. "Can I give you some advice, woman to woman, not supervisor to subordinate?" Laura nodded. "This company, this industry, this world, they are brutal to women who dare to want it all. Career and love, ambition and vulnerability, success and human connection." Sophia paused. "I've spent the last 15 years proving that I'm as good as any man in this office. Do you know what that cost? 2 failed relationships, 0 social life, and a reputation for being a cold-hearted bitch. Because if I showed any emotion, any weakness, anything that marked me as too feminine, I would be discarded." "Sophia, let me finish." Sophia raised her hand. "I'm not saying you should do what I did. I'm saying you need to decide what you want and be prepared to fight for it. If you want Richard, if there's something real there, then fight for it. But understand that it will cost. It will cost your reputation for a while. It will cost how people see you. It will cost sleepless nights wondering if it was worth it." "And if I decide it's not worth it?" Laura asked. "What if I choose my career?" "Then choose your career and don't look back," Sophia said firmly. "But don't stay in the middle ground. Don't linger in this space of, there's something, but we're not acting on it. Because that's the worst of both worlds. You pay all the social costs of a relationship without any of the real benefits." Laura processed that in silence. "What would you do," she finally asked, "if you were in my place?" Sophia let out a humorless laugh. 10 years ago, I would have chosen my career without blinking. Today," she looked out the glass window of the meeting room at the office outside, "today I have 45 minutes to have lunch alone, no saved phone numbers other than co-workers, and an empty apartment waiting for me every day. So maybe I'm not the best person to give advice." There was a deep sadness in those words that made Laura's chest tighten. "Just don't let fear decide for you," Sophia said, already walking toward the door. "Whatever your choice, let it be yours, based on what you want, not on what you're afraid of losing." After Sophia left, Laura was alone in the meeting room for another 5 minutes, trying to organize the chaos of thoughts and emotions. When she finally returned to her desk, she found an email waiting. From Rodrigo, AllenAssociates.com, to Laura Miller, AllenAssociates.com. Subject: investigation. Laura, I know you were interviewed by Maria today. I was too. I told her the truth, that I have feelings for you that go beyond the professional, but I've never acted on them in a way that compromised your work or created a hostile environment. I also made it clear that any consequences from this investigation should fall on me, not on you. If anyone needs to leave this company, it's me. You deserve to be here. Your talent is real. Your work is exceptional. Don't let anyone, including yourself, convince you otherwise. Laura read the email 3 times, her chest tightening with each reading. He was willing to leave the company that was his entire identity, all of his family legacy, everything he had built. For her, this should make her happy. It should make her feel valued, protected. Instead, she felt panic. Because if he left because of her, she would never be able to prove to herself or anyone else that she deserved to be there. She would always be the woman who cost the CEO his job. She would always be the one who wasn't worth it. Her fingers flew over the keyboard. To Rodrigo, AllenAssociates.com. From Laura Miller, AllenAssociates.com. Subject: re-investigation. You are not leaving this company because of me. I won't let you do that. If there are consequences, we face Them together, or we don't face them at all. But I will not be the reason you lose everything you've built. L. The response came in less. Richard Allen stared at the screen, his fingers hovering above the keyboard. What were they proposing? How could they protect both their careers while dealing with feelings they could no longer deny? She had no answer. And as the day progressed, with curious glances and barely concealed whispers following her throughout the office, Laura realized that perhaps there was no good answer. Maybe some choices didn't have a perfect solution. Maybe you just chose what you could live losing and prayed that what remained would be enough to survive. The investigation lasted a full 2 weeks, 14 days of constant tension that turned the workplace into something toxic and suffocating. Laura felt the stares wherever she went, heard conversations stop abruptly when she entered a room, saw groups form and disperse in the hallways. It was like being in an aquarium, constantly observed, judged, dissected. Maria interviewed practically everyone on the 18th floor. Sarah told Laura, in hurried whispers during a fake coffee break, that the questions were direct and invasive. Have you seen any inappropriate behavior between Laura and the CEO? Do you think Laura received preferential treatment? Did you observe any physical interaction between them? Mark, the supervisor who had never hidden his resentment, apparently had much to say. Emily, the senior architect who had made the original complaint, was interviewed for over an hour. Even John, Richard's driver, was called in to testify about the night he drove Laura and Emily home. During those 2 weeks, Laura and Richard maintained absolute distance. No personal messages, no private conversations, nothing beyond strictly professional emails, always copying Dr. Sophia or another supervisor. It was torture. Seeing Richard cross the office and not being able to make prolonged eye contact, having questions about the project and having to channel them through third parties, feeling the connection between them being forcibly severed like a surgery without anesthesia. On the second Friday of March, Laura was working on finishing touches for the facade when Sarah rushed in, her face pale. "They made a decision," Sarah said without preamble. "Maria just sent an email summoning you and Richard for a meeting at 4 o'clock, along with the board." Laura looked at the clock on her computer screen. 3:20, 40 minutes. "Along with the board," she repeated, her stomach twisting. "That means it's serious. Or it means they want to wrap this up publicly, make it clear that they investigated and took action." Sarah tried to sound hopeful, but her voice betrayed concern. Laura saved the file she was working on with trembling fingers. 40 minutes. 40 minutes until she would find out if she still had a job, if her career was over before it really began, if everything she had fought for in the last 6 years would evaporate because of feelings she hadn't even acted upon. She grabbed her phone and texted Mrs. Thompson, asking if she could pick up Emily from school. If the news was bad, Laura didn't trust herself to drive, take public transport, or do anything other than collapse. At 3:55, Laura stood in front of the elevator, her heart pounding so hard she could hear her pulse in her ears. The doors opened, and there was Richard. They stared at each other for a long moment. He looked impeccable as always, dark grey suit, white shirt, navy tie, but there were deep shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there 2 weeks. Ego? He wasn't sleeping either. "Laura," he said softly, stepping out of the elevator. "Richard," she replied, keeping her voice neutral despite the knot in her throat. They entered the elevator together, alone for the first time in 14 days. The doors closed, isolating them from the world for a few precious seconds. "I'm so sorry," Richard said immediately, turning to face her. "For all of this. You shouldn't be going through this." "It's not your fault," Laura replied, staring at the numbers lighting up as they ascended. "Feelings aren't something we control. Actions are. And our actions were inappropriate?" he asked, and there was something broken in his voice. Because I've replayed everything 1,000 times, Laura. Every conversation, every decision, every moment. And I can't see where we went wrong enough to deserve this. We were wrong to care, Laura said bitterly. In a world where human connection between superiors and subordinates is automatically suspect, we were wrong to allow one another to see each other as a person instead of a corporate title. The elevator stopped on the 21st floor. The doors began to open. Laura. Richard touched her arm lightly, the first physical touch in 2 weeks. No matter what happens in the next few minutes, you need to know that I don't regret it. At all, except for putting you in this position. She didn't have time to respond. The doors were already fully open, and Maria was waiting in the hallway. The conference room was full, not just Maria and Richard from HR, but also the 5 board members, Edward, Patricia, David Chen, Mark, and Sophia. All sitting around that enormous mahogany table, carefully neutral expressions. Laura sat in a chair in the middle, Richard in the chair next to her, close enough for solidarity, far enough not to seem inappropriate. Her hands were trembling, so she hid them in her lap, fingers intertwined so tightly that the knuckles turned white. Maria stood up, a thick folder in her hands. "Thank you for coming," she began formally. "As you know, over the last 2 weeks we have conducted a thorough investigation into allegations of inappropriate relationships and possible favoritism involving Laura Miller and CEO Richard Allen. We interviewed 23 witnesses, reviewed 342 corporate emails, analyzed meeting records, hiring decisions and project allocations, and examined personal communications as voluntarily provided by both parties." Laura swallowed hard. 342 emails. Had they exchanged that many emails in 6 weeks? "Our investigation focused on 3 main questions," Maria continued. 1. Is there a romantic or sexual relationship between Laura Miller and Richard Allen? 2. Was there any inappropriate favoritism in project assignments or treatment of Laura? 3. Was there any violation of company policies regarding relationships between superiors and subordinates? She paused, opening the folder. "Regarding the first question, romantic or sexual relationship, our conclusion is complicated." Laura's heart stopped. "The evidence suggests a strong mutual attraction and the development of an emotional connection that goes beyond strictly professional," Maria read from her notes. "Multiple witnesses reported tension between you two, lingering glances, and what one witness described as obvious chemistry. Mr. Allen openly admitted to developing feelings for Laura. Laura, you were less direct, but you did not deny the attraction when questioned." Laura could feel her face burning. All eyes were on her. "However," Maria continued, "we found no evidence of a consummated physical relationship. No witnesses reported kissing, inappropriate physical contact, or romantic encounters. Mr. Allen's visit to Laura's residence was confirmed to have lasted approximately 50 minutes, but Laura's daughter was present the entire time, as confirmed by an interview with the neighbor who was babysitting. They interviewed Mrs. Thompson. Jesus Christ, they had gone as far as interviewing her neighbor. "Our conclusion," Maria said, "is that there is mutual attraction and emotional attachment, but no active romantic or sexual relationship at the time of this investigation." Edward, Richard's uncle, spoke for the first time. "At the time of this investigation, does that suggest you think it could evolve into such a relationship?" "Yes," Maria answered without hesitation. "Based on observations and statements from both parties, I believe that without intervention, yes, the relationship would evolve. And that brings us to the second question." Maria turned a page. "Inappropriate favoritism." Laura held her breath. "This was the most intensely examined part of the investigation," Maria explained. "We reviewed Laura's hiring process. It was standard. She went through 3 rounds of interviews with different team members before reaching Mr. Allen. Her portfolio was blind reviewed by 5 senior architects, including Sophia Anderson, all ranking it among the top 3 of 52 candidates." Sophia nodded in confirmation when Maria looked in her direction. The assignment of the Olympic Village project to Laura after only 3 weeks was unusual, Maria admitted, but our analysis of the unsolicited optimization proposal she presented shows exceptional quality work. 3 of the 5 senior architects consulted confirmed they would have made the same choice based purely on the technical merits of the proposal. 3 out of 5, Edward pointed out, which means 2 would not have made that choice. Correct, Maria confirmed. 2 senior architects felt that Laura's experience did not justify a project of such magnitude, regardless of the quality of the initial proposal. "And who are those 2 architects?" Richard asked, his voice tense. "Mark Taylor and Emily Foster," Maria replied, "the same ones who expressed concerns about possible favoritism." "How convenient," Richard murmured, but it wasn't quiet enough. "Mr. Allen," Mark, the lawyer, interjected, "let's keep this professional. Please continue, Maria." "Laura's work reviews by Sophia Anderson were examined," Maria continued. "Sophia, can you summarize your findings?" Sophia straightened in her chair, looking directly at Laura. "Laura's work is exceptional, period. In the 3 months since she took on the project, she has delivered technical drawings of quality equal to or exceeding what I would expect from architects with 10 years of experience. She accepts feedback, implements corrections quickly, and demonstrates a deep understanding of structure, sustainability, and aesthetics. If favoritism is happening, it is not reflected in the quality or quantity of work she produces." "But?" Laura asked, because there was clearly a but hanging in the air. "But," Sophia continued, "Mr. Allen has unusually high involvement in her project reviews. He attends approximately 60% of the review meetings, when he would normally attend maybe 10%. He requests weekly updates in person, when he would typically only be informed monthly. This special attention is notable, because it's an $80 million project," Richard defended. "It's one of the largest investments we've made this year. Why wouldn't I be closely monitoring it?" "Because you are not equally closely monitoring the other 3 projects of similar magnitude underway," Patricia, the CFO, replied coldly. "I checked. You did not attend a single review meeting for the shopping center in the East Zone, a $90 million project. You did not request personal updates for the condominium in Alphaville, $102 million. But Laura's project, you are involved in every detail." The silence that followed was devastating. "Our conclusion on favoritism," Maria finally said, "is that there was disproportionate attention to Laura's work, but that attention did not result in lowered standards or acceptance of inferior work. If anything, Laura has been held to a higher standard because she is under greater scrutiny. Therefore, technically, there is no favoritism in the sense of inadequate work being accepted, but there is differential treatment at the level of CEO involvement." And that brings us to the 3rd question. Maria turned to the last page. Violation of company policies. This was the moment. Laura held her breath. The company policy is clear. Romantic or sexual relationships between superiors and direct subordinates are prohibited. However, as established, there is no active romantic or sexual relationship. Maria paused. But the policy also states that relationships that create an appearance of impropriety or compromise professional judgment must be reported and managed. "And do you think we've reached that point?" Richard asked. "I think," Maria said carefully, "that you are very close to that point. Dangerously close." "So what is the recommendation?" David Chen asked, speaking for the first time. His slight accent made it difficult to interpret his tone. Was he curious or condemning? Maria exchanged glances with the members of the room. My official recommendation is as follows. Laura Miller should be transferred to report directly to Sophia Anderson, removing the direct line of reporting with the CEO. Mr. Allen should completely abstain from participating in decisions related to Laura's career, promotions, raises, project assignments, performance evaluations. These decisions should be made exclusively by Sophia and the board. Laura felt relief and disappointment simultaneously. She was not being fired, but she was also being effectively separated from Richard in all the ways that mattered professionally. Additionally, Maria continued, I recommend mandatory training on professional boundaries for both and a 6-month observation period. If during this time there is any evidence of a developing relationship or inappropriate conduct, one of the two parties will have to leave the company. One of the two parties, Edward repeated. You're not specifying who. No, Maria said firmly, because despite the power imbalance, both are adults capable of making decisions. Both chose to allow this situation to develop. Therefore, both share responsibility for the consequences. Richard leaned forward. I would like to formally declare that if anyone has to leave, it should be me. Laura did nothing. With all due respect, Mr. Allen, Mark interrupted him, you don't decide that unilaterally. The board decides. And frankly, losing our CEO over unrequited feelings would be detrimental to the company. Laura is talented, yes, but replaceable. You are not. The words hit Laura like a physical slap. Replaceable. After all, every bit of hard work, every sleepless night, every bit of excellence demonstrated, she was still replaceable. I strongly disagree with that characterization, Sophia said, surprising everyone. Laura is no more replaceable than Richard. Good CEOs exist. Architects with genuine talent are rare. And the implication that we should protect the man in a position of power while the woman bears all the blame and consequences is exactly the kind of institutional sexism this company claims to be fighting against. Sophia, Edward began. No. Sophia cut him off, standing up. No, you are going to listen to me. I have spent 15 years in this company, watching men get promoted based on potential, while women have to prove concrete results. Watching men have affairs and keep their jobs, while women are discreetly let go. Watching every damn double standard being perpetuated under the guise of corporate policy. She looked directly at Laura. This woman has produced exceptional work under immense pressure. She has violated no policy. She has not had an affair. She simply had the misfortune of developing feelings for someone in a position of power, feelings that, I must remind you, were mutual and not initiated by her. And now we are discussing making her replaceable. Spare me. The silence in the room was absolute. Patricia was the first to speak. Sophia has a point. Our recommendation needs to be fair to both parties. I agree, David Chen said. In investments, we call this shared risk. Both contributed to the situation. Both should have the opportunity to correct it. Mark nodded slowly. So are we all in agreement with Maria's recommendation? Laura reports to Sophia. Richard removes himself from her career decisions. 6 months of observation. One by one, the board members nodded, even Edward, though visibly reluctant. Then it's decided, Mark declared. Laura, Richard, you understand and agree to these terms? Yes, Laura said, her voice coming out stronger than she expected. Yes, Richard confirmed. Great. Maria closed the folder. Then I consider this investigation closed. Laura, you will receive formal documentation of the reporting structure change tomorrow. Mr. Allen, I will schedule the training for next week. Everyone can go. People began to rise, collecting papers, dispersing. Laura remained seated for a moment, processing everything that had just happened. She kept her job. She kept her project. But what was she losing, exactly? The connection with Richard that was already being severed by the investigation, the possibility of something more. That had never really been viable anyway, so why did she feel like she had just lost something precious? Laura, Sophia's voice pulled her from her thoughts. Come with me. We need to talk about how this transition is going to work. Laura stood on shaky legs, following Sophia out of the room. At the door, she looked back once. Richard was still sitting there, elbows on the table, head in his hands. He looked defeated. She wanted to go back, put her hand on his shoulder, tell him everything would be okay. But she couldn't. Not now. Maybe never again. As the elevator descended with her and Sophia in tense silence, Laura realized something important. She had survived. Against all odds, against rumors and investigations and brutal corporate politics, she had survived. But survival was not the same as victory, and the price of that survival was just beginning to become clear. The next 3 months were the most productive and solitary of Laura's professional life. Under Sophia's direct supervision, she dove into the Olympic Village project with an almost obsessive intensity, arriving at 7 in the morning, leaving at 8 at night, working weekends when Emily was with Mrs. Thompson or busy with school activities. It was easier to work than to think, easier to lose herself in lines and calculations than to confront the emptiness that had settled in her chest. Sophia was a demanding but fair supervisor. She scrutinized every detail, questioned every design choice, challenged every technical decision. But unlike Mark or Emily, her critiques were constructive, aimed at strengthening the work rather than diminishing it. And when Laura got it right, which happened more and more frequently, Sophia did not hold back on praise. "This water capture system is brilliant," Sophia said one May morning, studying the drawings spread out on the conference table. The New York winter was beginning, bringing chilly mornings and grey skies. "You managed to integrate functionality with aesthetics in a way that I rarely see. This will impress the commission." Laura felt a warmth in her chest, not the complicated and confusing warmth she felt when Richard complimented her, but pure professional satisfaction. "Thank you. It took me 3 weeks to get the angle of the gutters right without compromising the lines of the facade. It was worth every hour." Sophia closed the folder. "We are ready to submit the complete executive project for approval. With documentation of this level, I would estimate an 85% chance of approval on the first round." 85%, Laura repeated, hardly believing it. Projects of this scale usually took 3 or 4 attempts for full approval. "Are you sure?" "I am." Sophia looked at her with something akin to maternal pride. "Laura, in 3 months you've produced work that architects take 6 months to complete. And not just faster, better. This project will set the standard for luxury, sustainable construction in New York for the next 5 years. It was the kind of praise Laura had dreamed of her whole life. She should be euphoric, celebrating, calling to tell. Who? Emily wouldn't understand the technical importance. Mrs. Thompson would be kind but confused. Sarah would be happy for her, but was busy with her own projects. And Richard? Well, Richard was no longer part of her professional life. In the 3 months since the investigation, Laura had seen him exactly 7 times. 4 times in company-wide meetings, where he spoke to 200 people, and his eyes passed over her as if she were just another employee. Twice in the elevator, where they exchanged polite good mornings and nothing more. Once in the parking lot, where he was getting into the Mercedes with John while she waited for her Uber, and their eyes met for 3 devastating seconds before he looked away and got in. The car. Text messages had completely stopped. Emails were non-existent. Any necessary communication went through Sophia. It was as if the last few months had never happened, as if that intense and frightening connection had been erased from reality. Laura should have felt relieved. No complications, no tension, no risk to her career. She could focus on work, prove her worth independently, build a reputation based purely on merit. So why did she feel so empty? "Laura?" Sophia's voice brought her back to the present. "Are you okay? You kind of disappeared for a second." "Sorry." Laura forced a smile. "I was just processing. 85% is... Wow." Sophia studied her face for a long moment. "You've been working too much. When was the last time you took a day off? A real day, not working from home?" Laura tried to remember. It had been... when? March? April? I'm not sure." "Take this weekend off," Sophia said firmly. "The whole weekend, Saturday and Sunday. Turn off your laptop, ignore emails, spend time with your daughter. That's an order, not a suggestion." "But the submission for the city can wait until Monday," Sophia interrupted. "Laura, I've been there. That survival mode where you work to avoid feeling. It works for a while, but eventually you break. And when you break, it will be much worse than if you had paused to process things now." Laura opened her mouth to deny, to say she was fine, that she wasn't avoiding anything. But the words died in her throat because Sophia was right. She knew she was right. "Okay," Laura said quietly. "Weekend off." Saturday dawned with a grey sky and the cold air typical of May in New York. Laura woke up at 8, absurdly late for her recent standards, with Emily jumping on her bed. Mom, wake up! You promised we would do something special today." Had Laura promised? She rummaged through her hazy memory of the past weeks. Oh, yes. On Thursday, when she got home at 9:30 and found Emily already in pajamas watching cartoons alone, she had promised a special Saturday together. "How about a movie?" Laura suggested, struggling to open her eyes. "That animated film you wanted to see?" "No." Emily crossed her arms, looking much older than her 7 years. "You always suggest a movie because it's easy. We just sit in the dark for 2 hours. And don't have to talk. I want to do something real." The observation hit Laura like a punch. When had her daughter become so perceptive? "Okay. What do you want to do then?" Emily's eyes lit up. "Central Park, ride bikes, have a picnic, see the ducks in the lake. Just like we used to before you started your new job." Before you started your new job. The words carried a subtle accusation that a 7-year-old didn't intend but still cut deep. "Then let's go," Laura said, forcing enthusiasm. "Central Park all day, but you have to help me make the sandwiches for the picnic." Central Park was as crowded as ever on weekends. Families with strollers, couples holding hands, groups of teenagers, seniors walking. The sun had finally won against the grey clouds, creating that perfect autumn afternoon that made you temporarily forget the chaos of the city around you. Laura and Emily rented bikes, a small purple one for Emily, an adult blue one for Laura, and pedalled along the winding paths of the park. Emily rode ahead, her pink helmet slightly askew, laughing every time she had to swerve to avoid a jogger or a loose dog. "Mom, go faster!" Emily shouted over her shoulder. "You're too slow!" Laura sped up, the cold wind hitting her face, and for the first time in months she felt something like lightness. Not exactly happiness, but a temporary absence of the constant weight she carried. They stopped near the lake, spreading an old beach towel on the grass and opening the backpack filled with cheese and ham sandwiches, apples, juice boxes, and chocolate cookies. "These are Emily's favorites." "This is perfect," Emily said, biting into her sandwich with satisfaction. "Much better than the movies." Laura smiled, running her hand through her daughter's hair. "You were right. I'm sorry for always offering the easy option. It's okay. Emily shrugged with that childlike ability for instant forgiveness. I know you work a lot. Aunt Tessa said you're building giant buildings that will help the planet. Aunt Tessa said that? Laura asked, surprised. Uh-huh. She said you're like a superhero of buildings. Emily paused, chewing thoughtfully. Mom? Yes, sweetheart? Do you like your new job? The question caught Laura off guard. Yes, I do. Why? Because you don't seem happy, Emily said with the brutal honesty of children. You work all the time, but you never smile anymore. Before, when you worked at the old office, you complained about the annoying boss and the boring projects, but you smiled more. Now you don't complain, but you also don't smile. Laura felt tears prick at her eyes. I'm just tired, sweetheart, but I promise to try to smile more. And you don't see Uncle at the hospital anymore, Emily added. The one who was nice to me when I got sick. Did he stop coming? Laura's heart ached painfully. He didn't exactly stop coming. We just don't work as closely together anymore. Did you fight with him? No, we didn't fight. Things just changed. Sometimes things change even when we don't want them to. Emily considered this for a moment. I liked him. He had kind eyes, and he looked at you the same way Aunt Tessa looks at pictures of her husband who passed away. Laura choked on the juice she was drinking. What do you mean? Like someone looking at something precious, Emily explained with the disarming simplicity of a child. Like when I look at my favorite teddy bear, of all the people to precisely diagnose what was between her and Richard, it had to be her 7-year-old daughter. Emily, Laura began, choosing her words carefully, sometimes adults like each other but can't be together. Because of complications. What kind of complications? Work complications, mostly. When one adult is the boss of another adult, they can't date because it would be unfair to other people. But he was nice, Emily protested, the child logic unable to process corporate politics. If you both like each other and he's nice, why can't you be together? Laura had no answer for that, or rather she had all the rational answers. Corporate politics, power, imbalance, appearance of impropriety, career risk. But none of them seemed suitable to explain to a child who still believed that liking someone should be enough. Sometimes the adult world doesn't make much sense, Laura finally said. But I promise things will be okay. Emily didn't seem convinced, but she dropped the subject, turning her attention back to the ducks in the lake. Laura watched her daughter throw pieces of bread to the birds. Technically, it wasn't allowed to feed them, but everyone did, and tried not to think about dark brown eyes and how it had been. 3 months since the last real conversation she had with Richard. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. Out of habit, she checked. Sophia had said to ignore emails, but what if it was an emergency? The name on the screen made her heart race. Richard, personal cell. She had deleted the number 3 weeks ago, but apparently not from the old message history. The message was short. I saw your car in the parking lot at Central Park. Hope you're enjoying the day off you definitely deserve. Laura looked around automatically, as if he might be hiding behind a tree. How did he know she was here? And then she realized he must have seen her car in the parking lot when what? When he also came to the park. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Responding was risky. They hadn't exchanged personal messages in 3 months. The investigation was technically closed, but the 6-month observation period was still ongoing. Any contact could be interpreted as, screw it, she thought. It was an innocent message. An equally innocent response didn't violate any policy. Thanks, first day off in weeks. Are you here too? The reply came within seconds, running. Something I do when I need to clear my head. And do you need to clear your head? There was a longer pause before the next message. Always. Especially in the last 3 months. Laura bit her lower lip, torn between the impulse to continue the conversation and the wisdom of ending it. Before she could decide, another message arrived. Sorry, I shouldn't have messaged. I just saw you in the parking lot with Emily, and you both looked so happy that I had to say something, even though I probably shouldn't have. No, it's okay, Laura typed quickly. It was good to hear from you, even though it probably shouldn't be. How are you? A simple question. But Laura knew he wasn't asking about the project or work. He was asking how she was really doing. Honestly, I don't know. Busy, productive, empty. It's confusing. I understand confusing. How are you? The same. Working a lot, sleeping little, avoiding thinking about what I'm avoiding thinking about. Laura closed her eyes, squeezing her phone tightly. 3 months, 3 months of forced distance, and here they were, in a few exchanged messages, instantly returning to that connection that should have been cut, buried, forgotten. Mum, who's messaging? Emily appeared beside her, curious. No one important, sweetheart. The lie came out automatically, and Laura hated herself for it. Work? But you said you weren't going to work today. You're right. I'm sorry. Laura determinedly put her phone away. No more phone. Today is just you and me. Emily smiled victoriously, taking her mother's hand. Come on, let's feed some more ducks. Laura's phone buzzed twice more in her pocket over the next hour, but she resisted the urge to check it. Not until she was home. Not until Emily was asleep. Not until she could properly process what those messages meant. It was 10:30 at night when Laura finally allowed herself to look at her phone again. Emily was sound asleep after a full day of activities, and the apartment was quiet except for the distant sound of traffic outside. 2 messages from Richard awaited. I'm sorry if the messages were inappropriate. I didn't mean to complicate things for you. And 15 minutes later, but I don't regret sending them. 3 months without talking to you has been the hardest thing I've ever done professionally. And I've done a lot of hard things. Laura sat on the couch, her heart racing. She should delete the messages. She should block the number. She should maintain the distance that had been so painfully established. Instead, her fingers typed, "Me too." The response was instant, as if he had been waiting, phone in hand. Laura. Richard. We need to talk for real, not over text. We can't. You know we can't. I can drive over right now. 10 minutes. Laura's pulse quickened dangerously. He would come here? Now? At almost midnight? This was exactly the kind of behavior that had caused the investigation in the first place. No, too risky. If someone sees, then meet me somewhere, anywhere, a cafe, a park, my car. Please, Laura. 3 months is too long. She should say no. Every rational cell in her brain was screaming to say no, to end the conversation, to return to the safety of professional distance. But 3 months of emptiness, 3 months of working not to feel, 3 months of denying something that refused to be denied. Everything crumbled suddenly. 24-hour bakery at the corner of Cardoso de Almeida Street and Hater Penteado. 30 minutes. I'll be there. Laura stared at her phone for a long moment after sending the message, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. What was she doing? This was madness. This was throwing away 3 months of careful reconstruction of professional boundaries. But as she grabbed a jacket, checked that Emily was deeply asleep, and left a note for Mrs. Thompson in case the neighbor checked on the child, as she sometimes did, Laura realized something important. She was tired of always making the rational choice, the safe choice, the choice that protected her career but suffocated everything else. Sometimes you had to take risks. Sometimes you had to choose to live instead of just survive. And as she descended the apartment stairs toward a meeting that could cost her everything, Laura finally admitted to herself the truth she had been denying for 3 months. She didn't want to survive without Richard anymore. She wanted to find out what it could be if they stopped fighting the inevitable, even if it cost everything. The Bread and Art Bakery was one of those 24-hour establishments that served New York in the early morning hours, frequented by night shift workers, desperate college students before exams, and occasionally couples having difficult conversations away from prying ears. The fluorescent lights were harsh, the formica tables worn from time, and the smell of strong coffee and fresh French bread filled the air. Laura arrived first, choosing a table in the farthest corner, away from the windows that faced the street. Her hands trembled as she ordered a black coffee that she had no intention of drinking. She was really doing this, meeting her boss, ex-boss, technical superior, at midnight in a bakery, 3 months after a corporate investigation that nearly destroyed both their careers. 5 minutes later, Richard walked in. He wasn't in a suit. The first time Laura had seen him like this. Dark jeans, a simple black t-shirt, leather jacket, no gel in his hair, which fell slightly over his forehead. He looked younger this way, more human, less like an untouchable CEO. His eyes found hers instantly, as if there were an invisible radar connecting them. He ordered a coffee at the counter and walked to her table, each step measured, controlled. When he sat down on the cheap plastic chair across from her, the whole world seemed to shrink to that small space between them. "Hi," he said, his voice hoarse, laden with emotion. "Hi," Laura replied, her hands gripping the warm coffee cup tightly. They sat in silence for a moment, just looking at each other. 3 months, 90 days since their last real conversation. 90 nights when Laura had lain in bed, trying not to think of him, trying not to calculate how many floors separated them in the corporate building, trying not to feel the absence like a physical hole in her chest. "Are you okay?" Richard finally asked. "Really?" "No," Laura said, "because what was the point of lying now? I've produced the best work of my career in the last 3 months. The project is exceptional, going for city approval on Monday. Sophia said it will set standards for the next 5 years. I should be on cloud 9. But I feel empty." The words came out in a whisper. "Every time I finish something, every time I receive a compliment, every time I reach an important milestone, I look around looking for someone to share it with. And you're not there. And I realize that achieving everything I've ever wanted means nothing if there's no one who truly sees you to share it." Richard briefly closed his eyes, as if the words had caused him physical pain. "I saw every one of your presentations. Every email that Sophia forwarded to the board about your progress. Every compliment. Every milestone achieved. I saw it all, Laura, from afar, where I'm forced to stay. But I saw." "It's not the same," Laura said, tears threatening to fall. "Seeing from afar is not. It's not the same as being there. I know." He reached out his hand across the table, stopping inches from hers, not daring to touch. "God, Laura, I know. I spent 3 months wanting to be in every meeting you had with Sophia, wanting to ask you about every design decision, wanting to be there when you were clearly exhausted and needed someone. But I couldn't. Because of the investigation, because of the politics, because of me," Laura finished. "Because I needed to prove I deserved to be there, that it wasn't just favoritism, that it wasn't just because the CEO was interested. I needed it to be real." "And it is," Richard said with absolute conviction. "It's real, Laura. Your talent, your competence, your value to that company. It's all absolutely real. You've proven that 1,000 times, to the board, to Sophia, to every skeptic in that office." "But I still haven't proven it to myself," Laura admitted, her voice breaking. "Because every time I look at my success, I wonder, would I have achieved this if you hadn't seen me first? If you hadn't bet on me when no one else would? If I hadn't fallen in love with you?" Richard finished, the words hanging in the air between them like a confession finally set free. The silence that followed was absolute. The cafe around them continued its nighttime existence. The barista wiping down the counter, a student in the corner typing furiously on a laptop, a rideshare driver picking up coffee to go. But for Laura, everything had stopped. "You can't say that," she whispered. "Why not? It's the truth." Richard leaned forward, the intensity back in his eyes. "I spent 3 months trying not to feel this. 3 months convincing myself it was a fleeting attraction, a temporary fascination, something that would fade with distance and time. But it didn't fade, Laura. It got worse. Every day without talking to you, every meeting where I saw you from afar but couldn't get close, every night going home to an empty apartment and realizing I achieved everything professionally but have no one who truly matters." He paused, taking a deep breath. "My father died at 63, alone in an office, surrounded by success and devoid of real connection. I swore I would never be like that. But I was becoming exactly that until you showed up and made me feel something real, for the first time in years." Laura wiped away a tear that had escaped. "Richard, this isn't simple. It's not just about what we feel. It's about corporate politics, the appearance of impropriety, the fact that even now, even after proving my worth, people will say you corrupted me, manipulated me, used me. Then I'll leave the company," he said without hesitation. "What? No!" Laura practically shouted, lowering her voice quickly when the barista looked over. "No, you won't destroy everything you've built because of me." "Why not? It's just a company, Laura. It's money and power and status. But you are real. You are genuine. Connection. You see me as a person and not a title. It's the possibility of having a life that matters beyond board meetings and financial reports." "You're talking crazy," Laura said, but her heart was racing. "You love that company. It's your legacy, your identity." "No," Richard said firmly. "It was my prison. A gilded cage I built because I thought it was what was expected of me. But in the last 3 months, working with that housing non-profit on weekends, using my skills to build homes for families who really need it, for the first time in years, I felt useful. I felt like I was doing something that mattered." Laura didn't know that. "You're working with a non-profit?" "Every Friday night and Saturday," he confirmed. "After that project I started when I almost left the company during the investigation, I couldn't stop. It's small, insignificant compared to what I do at Allen and Associates, but it's real, Laura. It's tangible. It's families getting decent homes for the first time. That's—" Laura searched for the right words. "That's amazing, Richard." "It's different," he corrected, "and it made me realize there are other ways to use what I'm good at, besides building luxury skyscrapers. So yes, I would leave the company. It wouldn't be a sacrifice. It would be liberation." "And what if I don't want you to do that?" Laura challenged. "What if I want to stay where I am, build my career without the complication of a relationship with you? What if I choose work over this?" The pain that crossed Richard's face was visible, physical. "Then I would respect your choice, as I always have. But I would have to know. Is that what you really want, or is it what you think you should? Want because it's safe and rational?" The question cut deep because Laura had no answer. She no longer knew what she wanted versus what she thought she should want. The lines had completely blurred. "Emily asked about you today," Laura said suddenly, changing the subject. "At the park. She asked why the nice guy from the office stopped showing up. She said you had kind eyes and looked at me like you were looking at something precious." Richard let out a strangled laugh. "Your 7-year-old diagnosed me better than 3 months of mandatory corporate therapy." "You did therapy?" Laura asked, surprised. "Part of the investigation deal. 10 sessions on professional boundaries and appropriate power dynamics." He shrugged. "It was enlightening. The therapist basically spent 10 sessions trying to get me to admit I was using my position of power to manipulate you. When I finally convinced him that wasn't it, he changed tactics and said I was projecting needs. Emotional needs unfulfilled in a vulnerable employee. And you? Laura asked. Projecting unfulfilled needs? Richard looked her directly in the eyes. Do I have unfulfilled emotional needs? Absolutely. 30 years of building emotional walls leave a man quite needy for real connection. But am I projecting onto you specifically because you are convenient or vulnerable? No. I connected with you because you are extraordinary, Laura. Because you challenge me, question me, make me want to be better. Because when you look at me, you don't see the CEO or the family name or the bank account. You see the man, and that man is imperfect and complicated and probably much more damaged than you deserve, but he is real. The tears Laura had been holding back finally overflowed, rolling freely down her cheeks. I don't know how to make this work, Richard. I don't know how to have you in my career. I don't know how to protect Emily from speculation and gossip if we start something public. I don't know. Hey. He finally touched her, his fingers finding hers across the table. The contact was electric, months of touch hunger exploding in that simple intertwining of hands. You don't need to have all the answers right now. I don't have all the answers. But I know one thing. I don't want 3 more months of emptiness. I don't want to pretend that you are just a co-worker anymore. I don't want to carry this feeling alone anymore. What are you proposing? Laura asked, squeezing his fingers. Honesty. Richard said simply. We stop hiding. We go to HR on Monday and formally declare that we are starting a personal relationship. We follow all the protocols. I completely remove myself from any decision about your career. You continue reporting to Dr. Sophia. We maintain strict professional boundaries in the office. But outside of it, outside of it? Laura echoed. Outside of it, we try. We have dinner together. We get to know each other for real, without the pressure of the office or investigation or corporate politics. We let it be whatever it naturally becomes, without forcing, without hiding. It was risky. There would still be gossip, speculation, judgment. Emily would have her day of glory. Mark would roll his eyes, saying he always knew, but it would also be honest, real. A chance to find out if what was between them was strong enough to survive in the light of day. And Emily? Laura asked. If it goes wrong, if it doesn't work, she will be affected. She has already met you, already liked you. If you show up in her life for real and then disappear, I wouldn't disappear, Richard said with conviction. Laura, I'm not proposing something casual. I'm not saying, let's try and see what happens. I'm saying, I want to build something real with you. And if you have a daughter, then I want to know your daughter. I want to be part of her life if you let me. I want to have dinner with you both. I want to help with homework. I want to be there when she is sick or when you are overwhelmed. You are talking about, Laura could about barely say. You are talking about something serious, long-term. I'm talking about everything, Richard confirmed. Because when you know, you know. And I know, Laura. I knew the day you walked into the conference room with your portfolio and that fierce determination in your eyes. I knew when you defended your project to the board without blinking. I knew when I saw you singing softly to your daughter in the hospital, thinking no one was listening. I know. Laura's heart was beating so fast she could barely breathe. This was everything she wanted and everything that terrified her at the same time. Security versus passion, rationality versus feeling. The life she had carefully planned versus the life she could have if she were brave enough to take the risk. I'm scared, she finally admitted. Scared of losing my career, scared of not being good enough for you, scared that when you really get to know me, with all my neuroses and baggage and complications of being a single mother, you will realize that I'm not worth all this trouble. Laura. Richard squeezed her hands. "Look at me." She obeyed, finding those dark brown eyes that had haunted her. "For months, you are worth all the trouble," he said slowly, emphasizing each word. "You are worth every risk, every complication, every difficult conversation with HR or the board or anyone. You are worth it all." "How can you be so sure?" Laura whispered. "Because the last 3 months without you have been the proof," Richard said. "Because I had everything I thought I wanted, a thriving company, successful projects, respect from the industry, and I felt emptier than ever. And because when I saw you today in the park with your daughter, laughing at something she said, the sun shining on your face, I felt peace. For the first time in months, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be, even if it was just watching from afar." Laura closed her eyes, letting the words sink in, allowing herself to feel everything she had been repressing for months. The fear, yes, but also the hope, the possibility, the chance to have something real, something meaningful, something that went beyond professional success and maternal responsibility. "Okay," she finally said, opening her eyes. Richard froze. "Okay? Okay, we try," Laura confirmed, her voice gaining strength. "We go to HR, declare formally, follow all the protocols. We try, Richard, for real. No hiding, no denying, no running away because it's complicated. We face the complications together." The smile that spread across his face was like the sun rising, illuminating everything, warming places that had been cold for too long. "Together," he repeated, and the words sounded like a promise. They sat there, hands intertwined over the worn Formica table in a cheap bakery at 11:30 at night, and for the first time in months, she felt something beyond emptiness. She felt hope. Monday, 9 a.m. Laura and Richard entered together into Maria Johnson's office. The HR director looked up from her computer, her expression shifting from surprise to resignation in a matter of seconds. "Let me guess," Maria said, taking off her glasses. "You both decided that life would be too simple if you just followed the rules, so you decided to complicate everything again." "We would like to formally declare our intention to start a personal relationship," Laura said, her voice steady despite her nerves. "And we want to do this the right way, following all necessary protocols." Maria studied the two, and for a long moment, then she sighed. "Have a seat." They spent the next hour filling out forms, signing documents, and listening to Maria list all the rules and restrictions. Richard could not participate in any decisions related to Laura's career. Any work trip involving both of them needed a third person present. Laura's performance evaluations would be conducted by Sophia and reviewed by Mark from the board, never by Richard. Any gift or benefit that seemed preferential was prohibited. "Are we clear?" Maria concluded. "Any violation of these guidelines will result in immediate disciplinary action, possibly including termination." "Clearly understood," Richard confirmed. "One last thing." Maria leaned forward. "You know this is going to create waves. People will talk, especially about you, Laura. Sorry to have to say it, but it's the reality. They will question every promotion, every project, every success. Are you prepared for that?" Laura looked at Richard, then back at Maria. "I've spent 6 years proving my worth in an office where no one gave me a chance. I spent the last 3 months producing exceptional work under constant scrutiny. I will continue to do what I do best, let my work speak. For me, and if people choose to focus on my relationship instead of my competence, that says more about them than about me." Maria nodded slowly, something resembling respect appearing in her eyes. "Then consider it officially declared. I will inform the board this afternoon. You may go." As they left the HR office, the open space on the 18th floor was bustling with morning activity. Laura could feel the stares as she walked alongside Richard, not so close that it seemed inappropriate, but also not pretending they were strangers. Sarah caught her gaze from her desk, and Laura subtly nodded. Her friend smiled, giving two discreet thumbs up. Mark looked from his glass office, his expression sour. Emily turned completely in her chair to watch, her lips pursed in disapproval. Let them look. Let them judge. Laura had made her choice. She was not choosing career over relationship or relationship over career. She was choosing both, rejecting the false choice that women could only have professional success or personal connection, never both. Was it risky? Absolutely. Was it worth it? She was about to find out. And when Richard stopped in front of the elevators, turning to her with that smile that made her heart race, and said low enough for only her to hear, "Dinner tonight? I know a little place in Greenwich Village that does the best barbecue in the city." Laura smiled, a genuine free smile for the first time in months. "Emily will love it. She adores barbecue." "Then it's 3 places on the reservation," Richard said, and the way he included Emily automatically, without hesitation, made something warm in Laura's chest. The elevator arrived. Richard entered first and Laura followed him. When the doors closed, temporarily isolating them from the world, he took her hand briefly. A quick squeeze, a silent promise. "We will make it," he said. "I know," Laura replied, and for the first time since everything had started 6 months ago, since that January afternoon when Richard broke a wine glass during a meeting and changed the course of both their lives, Laura believed. It wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, obstacles, people trying to prove they were everything they suspected. But they would face it together. And sometimes being together was already half the victory. The elevator doors opened on the 22nd floor, and for Richard, before he stepped out, he looked back one last time. 6 o'clock, he asked. 6 o'clock, Laura confirmed. And when the doors closed again, taking her back to the 18th floor where her project awaited, where Sophia was likely preparing more demanding revisions, where Emily and Mark were certainly already creating new theories and gossip, Laura realized something important. She was no longer fighting alone. She was no longer carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders without allowing anyone to help. She had chosen, not just Richard, but herself. The version of her that deserved as much professional success as personal connection. The woman who could be an exceptional mother, a brilliant architect, and still have space in her heart for love. It was the beginning, not the end, but it was a beginning that felt right. And sometimes the right beginning was all you needed.